In the quiet hours before dawn, long before the sound of modern traffic or electric light, most of England's population lived within a world defined by land, season, and obligation. Medieval England was not primarily a place of castles and kings, but of villages, fields, and routines that changed only slowly across generations. For the vast majority of people, daily life unfolded within a few miles of where they were born, shaped by traditions that were rarely questioned and by a social order that was widely accepted as natural. To understand everyday life in medieval England, it is necessary to set aside many modern assumptions about progress and comfort. Life was neither uniformly miserable nor romantically simple. Instead, it existed within a balance of hardship, familiarity, community, and deeply rooted belief. Most people lived in small agricultural villages scattered across the English countryside. These settlements were typically organized around a parish church, a manor house, and the surrounding open fields. The church tower often served as the tallest structure for miles, acting not only as a religious center, but also as a landmark that defined the identity of the community. For many villagers, the rhythms of life were measured less by clocks and more by bells. Bells that marked prayer, work, rest, and gathering. The typical peasant household was modest but functional. Houses were usually constructed from timber frames packed with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung known as wattle and daub. Roofs were often thatched with straw or reeds. Inside, space was limited. A single room frequently served multiple purposes, including cooking, sleeping, and storage. The central hearth provided warmth and light, though smoke often escaped slowly through the roof rather than through a proper chimney, leaving interiors dim and air thick with soot. Furniture was sparse. A wooden table, benches, chests for storing grain or clothing, and simple straw mattresses were common. Privacy, as understood today, was largely unknown. Families slept close together, sometimes sharing space with small animals during harsh winters, not out of preference but necessity. Work defined nearly every aspect of daily existence. Agricultural labor was the foundation of the medieval economy, and most villagers were directly tied to the land. Fields were divided into long strips, cultivated collectively under the open field system. Each family tended several scattered strips rather than one enclosed plot, ensuring that good and poor soil was shared more evenly across the community. The agricultural year followed a predictable but demanding cycle. Spring brought plowing and sowing, summer required constant maintenance of crops, and autumn was dominated by harvest, a period that could determine whether a village would face comfort or scarcity in the months ahead. Winter, though quieter in terms of fieldwork, was not a season of rest. Repairs, tool-making, food preservation, and care of animals continued daily. Food was simple and heavily dependent on class. For peasants, the diet consisted largely of bread made from barley or rye, pottage made from grains and vegetables, and occasionally cheese or eggs. Meat was rare and often reserved for feast days or special occasions. Seasonal availability played a significant role. Fresh produce was abundant in summer but scarce in late winter, when preserved foods became essential. Water was not always safe to drink, and weak ale was commonly consumed by both adults and children. It provided calories and was often safer than untreated water sources. Contrary to some modern myths, medieval people were not unaware of cleanliness, but their methods were shaped by available resources and prevailing medical understanding. Clothing reflected both practicality and social status. Most villagers wore garments made from wool, which was durable and widely available. Colors were typically muted, as vibrant dyes were expensive. Clothing was often repaired repeatedly and passed down within families. Even small differences in fabric quality or decoration could signal a person's position within the community. Above the villagers stood the structure of feudal obligation. Many peasants were bound to the manor, required to provide labor, rent, or a share of their produce to the local lord. This relationship was not purely oppressive in every case. It also provided a framework of protection, access to land, and a system, however unequal, that maintained order. The manor functioned as both an economic and administrative center, overseeing disputes, taxation, and local regulation. Religion permeated nearly every aspect of medieval life. The church was not merely a place of worship, but the central institution that shaped moral understanding, calendar structure, and community identity. Holy days, fasts, and festivals punctuated the year, providing moments of rest and celebration amid otherwise demanding routines. Sermons and visual imagery within churches served as primary sources of education for a largely illiterate population. Belief in the supernatural coexisted comfortably with everyday reality. Many people accepted the presence of saints, miracles, divine punishment, and unseen forces as natural parts of existence. Illness, weather, and misfortune were often interpreted through a spiritual lens rather than a scientific one. This worldview did not reflect ignorance so much as a different framework for understanding cause and effect. Markets and small towns introduced occasional variety into village life. Weekly market days allowed villagers to trade surplus goods, purchase tools, or encounter travelers bringing news from distant regions. These interactions, though limited, connected rural communities to broader economic networks across England and beyond. Law and order were maintained through a combination of local courts, communal responsibility, and public accountability. Minor disputes were often settled within the village, while more serious matters were handled by manorial or royal authorities. Punishments could be harsh by modern standards, but they were intended as visible deterrents within tightly knit communities where reputation carried lasting consequences. Despite the hardships, periodic famine, disease, and limited medical knowledge, medieval villagers did not necessarily experience life as relentlessly bleak. Community bonds were strong, shared labor created mutual dependence, and traditions provided a sense of continuity. Festivals, marriages, seasonal celebrations, and religious observances offered moments of relief and collective identity. Over centuries, gradual changes began to reshape this world. Population growth, shifts in trade, the impact of the Black Death, and evolving economic practices slowly altered the structure of rural life. Yet for long stretches of time, daily routines remained remarkably consistent, passed from one generation to the next with only subtle variation. Understanding everyday life in medieval England reveals a society grounded less in dramatic events and more in repetition, obligation, and shared expectation. It was a world where survival depended on cooperation with both land and neighbor, where belief provided explanation, and where the pace of change was measured not in years, but in lifetimes. In examining this landscape of ordinary existence, it becomes clear that history is not only shaped by kings and battles, but by the quiet persistence of millions whose names were never recorded. Their routines, decisions, and traditions formed the foundation upon which the more visible structures of medieval society were built. As the morning light spread gradually across the fields, the first visible movement within most villages came not from conversation, but from habit. Daily routines were so deeply ingrained that they required little discussion. People rose early because daylight was a limited and valuable resource. Without artificial lighting, the working day was naturally bound to the rising and setting of the sun. The earliest tasks often involved tending to animals. Chickens needed to be released, pigs checked, and any larger livestock, such as oxen or cattle, prepared for the day's labor. Animals were not simply property. They represented security. A healthy ox could determine whether a family's field was plowed on time, and a small flock of hens might provide the difference between adequate nutrition and seasonal weakness. Breakfast, when it existed as a distinct meal, was usually modest. Leftover bread, a small portion of pottage, or ale diluted with water might be consumed quickly before work began in earnest. The concept of leisurely mornings was largely unknown. Time spent idle in the early hours meant lost productivity that could not easily be recovered. The organization of labor within a household followed both necessity and tradition. Men were typically responsible for heavier agricultural tasks, plowing, repairing fences, or managing livestock in distant pastures. Women's work, though often less visible in written records, was equally demanding. It included preparing food, maintaining the hearth, spinning wool into thread, brewing ale, caring for children, and managing small kitchen gardens that provided essential vegetables and herbs. Children were introduced to responsibility at an early age. Formal schooling was rare outside religious institutions, and practical knowledge was considered more valuable than literacy for most rural families. Young boys might assist with animals or fieldwork, while girls often learned spinning, cooking, and household management from older relatives. These roles were not seen as burdens imposed prematurely, but as necessary preparation for adult life within the same community. Seasonal variation shaped not only workload but also emotional atmosphere. During harvest time, the pace intensified noticeably. Entire villages worked collectively to bring crops in before weather could damage them. The urgency of this period created long days and physical exhaustion, yet it also fostered a sense of shared purpose. Successful harvests were often followed by communal meals or modest celebrations, acknowledging the relief that came with secured food stores. In contrast, the deeper winter months introduced a different rhythm. With fields dormant, attention shifted indoors. Tools were repaired, clothing mended, and preserved foods rationed carefully. Winter evenings were longer and darker, encouraging activities that required less movement but steady concentration, such as spinning wool or carving wooden implements. Storytelling, songs, and recitation of familiar tales helped pass time and reinforce shared identity. Lighting within homes remained limited. Candles, when available, were valuable and used sparingly. Many families relied primarily on the glow of the hearth. This dim environment shaped how evenings were spent. Tasks were chosen not for preference but for visibility. Fine work was often saved for daylight, while repetitive or well-practiced actions could continue after sunset. Health and medicine existed within a framework that combined inherited knowledge with religious belief. Herbal remedies were widely used, drawn from plants grown locally or gathered from nearby woodland. While some treatments had practical benefit, others relied on symbolic meaning or tradition. Serious illness could spread quickly, particularly in close living quarters, and communities had limited means to prevent or contain outbreaks. Despite these vulnerabilities, care for the sick was typically communal. Neighbors might assist with chores, provide food, or help tend animals while a household recovered. This mutual support was not purely charitable. It reflected an understanding that anyone could face similar hardship. Survival often depended less on individual strength and more on collective resilience. The structure of authority within the village was visible in everyday interactions. The local lord or his steward oversaw obligations related to land use, rents, and labor dues. Decisions regarding shared resources, such as grazing rights or use of woodland, were influenced by established customs rather than personal preference. While this hierarchy limited personal freedom, it also created predictable expectations that reduced conflict over scarce resources. The parish priest occupied a different, but equally influential position. Beyond conducting religious services, he often served as a mediator, advisor, and record keeper. Baptisms, marriages, and burials were not only spiritual events but also moments that formally acknowledged an individual's place within the community's memory. Travel beyond the immediate region was uncommon for most villagers. Roads were often rough, journeys slow, and obligations at home constant. As a result, news from distant areas arrived gradually, carried by traders, pilgrims, or occasional officials. These fragments of information were discussed carefully, sometimes embellished, and absorbed into local understanding of a wider world that few would ever see directly. Even within this limited horizon, awareness of larger forces, kings, wars, taxes, and changing laws, filtered into daily life through practical consequences. A new levy might alter how much grain a family could keep. Military campaigns could remove able-bodied men from villages. Royal decrees, though distant in origin, could reshape routines in subtle but lasting ways. Over time, these layers of routine, obligation, belief, and adaptation created a stable, if fragile, social fabric. Stability did not mean comfort by modern standards, but it did provide continuity. Most individuals expected their children to live lives not dramatically different from their own, shaped by the same fields, the same church, and the same cycle of seasons that had governed the lives of their ancestors. Within this steady rhythm of obligation and routine, the physical landscape itself played a constant and influential role in shaping experience. Medieval England was not a uniform environment, but a patchwork of open fields, hedgerows, forests, marshes, and small rivers. Each of these spaces carried both opportunity and restriction. Woodland, for instance, provided fuel, building material, and forage for animals, yet access was often regulated by manorial rights. Gathering fallen branches might be permitted, while cutting living timber without approval could bring penalties. The open field system required cooperation on a scale that modern individual farming rarely demands. Because fields were divided into long, narrow strips scattered across the same expanse, no household could act entirely independently. Plowing, sowing, and harvesting needed to occur in broadly coordinated phases. If one family delayed, it could disrupt irrigation patterns, shared grazing schedules, or the movement of animals across common land. This interdependence reinforced social pressure to conform, not through written enforcement alone, but through the expectations of neighbors whose survival was tied to the same soil. Tools used in daily agricultural work were simple but carefully maintained. Wooden plows fitted with iron tips, hand sickles for cutting grain, flails for threshing, and heavy wooden carts formed the practical backbone of rural labor. These implements represented significant investment for a household. A broken tool was not a minor inconvenience. It could mean missed planting windows or reduced harvest yields. For this reason, repair skills were widely valued, and even those primarily engaged in farming often possessed basic knowledge of woodworking or metal maintenance. Water sources were equally central to village placement. Wells, streams, or nearby rivers determined where settlements could sustain themselves over generations. Access to clean water affected cooking, brewing, washing, and animal care. In periods of drought or contamination, tension could arise quickly, revealing how fragile the balance of resources truly was. Seasonal flooding in low-lying areas sometimes destroyed crops or damaged homes, reminding communities that the natural world was not fully predictable despite centuries of accumulated experience. Housing quality varied, even within the same village. While most dwellings were modest, subtle differences signaled relative prosperity. A house with a slightly larger footprint, better timber, or a more durable roof suggested a family that had managed several stable harvests or held a more favorable arrangement with the manor. These distinctions were rarely ostentatious, yet they were clearly understood by those who lived nearby. Social awareness did not require written records. It was visible in materials, tools, and livestock. Inside the home, the management of heat was a daily concern for much of the year. England's climate, often damp and cool, meant that maintaining a steady fire was essential not only for comfort, but for food preparation and preservation. The hearth functioned as the emotional center of the household as well as its practical one. Its light defined the usable space after sunset, and its warmth influenced where people gathered, worked, and slept. Losing the ability to keep a fire through lack of fuel or illness posed immediate risk. Food storage demanded foresight and discipline. Grain might be kept in chests or communal storage areas, protected as carefully as possible from moisture and pests. Vegetables could be dried, salted, or stored in cool earth cellars. Failure in preservation was not always visible at once. Spoilage discovered late in winter could leave a family with few alternatives. This uncertainty encouraged cautious rationing, particularly as colder months progressed and supplies diminished. Trade, though limited in scale for most villagers, introduced small but meaningful variations in material life. Items such as metal pots, finer cloth, or specialized tools often arrived through traveling merchants or periodic fairs. These objects carried both practical benefit and symbolic value. Owning even one well-crafted item could represent connection to a broader economic network extending beyond the immediate region. Such possessions were cared for diligently, repaired when possible, and sometimes passed down across generations. Sound also shaped the texture of daily existence in ways that are difficult to imagine in modern settings. Without engines or constant mechanical noise, the dominant sounds were natural or communal. Wind across fields, animals moving in enclosures, the strike of tools against wood or soil, and the ringing of church bells marking shared time. These auditory signals helped structure the day, providing cues that replaced the need for personal timekeeping devices. Periods of collective gathering reinforced social cohesion. Beyond religious observance, villagers came together for seasonal tasks such as repairing shared paths, maintaining boundary markers, or assisting with large construction efforts like barn raising. Participation was expected, not only because labor was needed, but because absence signaled withdrawal from mutual responsibility. In small populations, reputation formed slowly but endured for years, shaping how assistance, trust, and cooperation were extended. Through these overlapping systems, land, tools, water, housing, sound, and shared labor, medieval villagers experienced a world that was both constrained and deeply familiar. Change, when it arrived, was often gradual enough to be absorbed without immediate disruption. Yet beneath this appearance of continuity, pressures could accumulate quietly, preparing the ground for transformations that would only become visible over the course of generations. Over longer stretches of time, subtle economic changes began to influence even the most stable villages. While daily routines remained rooted in agriculture, the growth of regional trade networks gradually introduced new expectations about value, exchange, and opportunity. Roads that had once served primarily local movement became part of wider commercial routes connecting market towns to larger urban centers such as London, York, and Norwich. Though most villagers still traveled rarely, the goods moving through these networks carried quiet evidence that the wider world was becoming more interconnected. Market towns functioned as intermediaries between rural production and broader commerce. Here, surplus grain, wool, cheese, or livestock could be exchanged for items that were difficult to produce within a single household. The presence of professional craftsmen, blacksmiths, millers, coopers, and cloth workers created small pockets of specialized labor that contrasted with the general self-sufficiency of village life. For rural families, visiting a market was both a practical necessity and a moment of exposure to different accents, customs, and information. Wool, in particular, held increasing importance within the English economy. Sheep required less intensive labor than some crops and could graze on land less suitable for cultivation. Over time, the demand for English wool, both domestically and across the Channel, encouraged landholders to reconsider how fields were used. While these shifts were gradual, they sometimes altered the balance between arable farming and pasture. For villagers whose livelihoods depended on access to shared land, even small changes in land management could have lasting consequences. The presence of mills illustrates another layer of economic structure within medieval communities. Grain had to be processed into usable flour, and many peasants were required to use the lord's mill, paying a portion of their harvest as a fee. This obligation was often resented, yet it was also accepted as part of the established order. The mill itself, with its steady turning wheel powered by water or wind, stood as a visible reminder of both technological adaptation and social hierarchy. Taxation, whether imposed by local lords or the crown, periodically disrupted the fragile equilibrium of rural households. Levies were not always predictable, and their impact depended heavily on the timing relative to harvest success or failure. A tax demanded after a poor season could push families toward debt or force the sale of animals that were essential for future productivity. In this way, decisions made far from the village, often in royal courts or administrative centers, could ripple outward into daily life with tangible effects. Information about such decisions traveled slowly, carried by officials, clergy, or itinerant traders. By the time news reached a remote settlement, it had often been interpreted, summarized, or altered through repeated retelling. Even so, villagers developed a practical awareness of authority beyond their immediate surroundings. The king might remain an abstract figure, yet his presence was felt through coinage, law, and obligation. Within households, the management of resources required constant judgment. Grain might be divided between what could be consumed immediately, what must be reserved for planting, and what needed to be set aside as rent or tithe. These decisions were rarely made casually. A miscalculation could compromise not only the current year but the next. Experience, memory of past shortages, and advice from older members of the community all informed how supplies were allocated. Marriage also carried economic as well as social significance. Partnerships were influenced by land access, labor needs, and family alliances within the village. Establishing a new household required tools, animals, and often the informal approval of both families and local authority. While affection and personal preference were not absent, practical considerations played a central role in determining how and when marriages occurred. As populations slowly expanded in certain periods, pressure on available land increased. Fields that had once been sufficient for a smaller community now had to support more households. This could lead to subdivision of strips, reduced yields per family, and heightened sensitivity to poor weather. Conversely, periods of population decline, often caused by disease, temporarily eased this pressure, leaving abandoned plots that could be redistributed among survivors. These demographic shifts altered daily expectations in ways that were felt more through opportunity or scarcity than through written record. Religious institutions also participated in the economic life of the countryside. Monasteries and parish churches owned land, collected tithes, and sometimes provided limited charity during times of hardship. Their storage facilities, administrative records, and relative stability made them important anchors during uncertain periods. For many villagers, the church represented not only spiritual guidance but also a place where assistance might be sought when ordinary support networks were strained. Through these gradual developments, medieval rural society did not transform overnight. Instead, it adapted through small adjustments, changes in land use, shifting trade patterns, evolving obligations, and cautious responses to risk. The pace remained slow enough that individuals often perceived continuity even as underlying structures were quietly evolving. In this way, everyday life in medieval England remained recognizable across generations, while the foundations beneath it were steadily, almost imperceptibly, being reshaped. Alongside these gradual economic adjustments, the experience of time itself was understood differently than it is today. Medieval villagers did not measure their days in precise minutes, but in sequences of familiar events. Dawn signaled the beginning of labor, the position of the sun suggested when to pause, and the ringing of church bells marked moments of prayer and gathering. Time was therefore communal rather than individual, shared across the village rather than privately tracked. The calendar that shaped expectations was largely religious. Feast days, fasts, and holy observances provided structure across the year, creating predictable intervals of work and rest. Major celebrations such as Christmas, Easter, and harvest festivals offered rare breaks from routine. These occasions were not extravagant by modern standards, yet they held deep emotional significance. Food might be slightly better, music more present, and the sense of shared identity more visible. Memory played an important role in preserving knowledge across generations. Without widespread literacy, practical information, when to plant certain crops, how to treat common illnesses, which fields drained well after heavy rain, was passed through observation and repetition. Older members of the community were therefore valued not only for authority but for experience. Their recollections of previous harsh winters or abundant harvests helped guide decisions in uncertain seasons. Weather remained one of the most powerful forces influencing daily life. A prolonged period of rain could delay planting, while unexpected frost might destroy early growth. Because agricultural methods depended heavily on natural conditions, even small climatic variations could have significant consequences. Villagers watched the sky closely, reading patterns in wind, cloud movement, and animal behavior as indicators of change. These observations formed a practical knowledge system developed over centuries. Clothing, though simple, also reflected adaptation to environment. Layers of wool helped retain warmth in damp conditions, while hoods and cloaks provided protection against frequent rain. Garments were often designed to be adjusted or repaired, extending their usefulness across many seasons. The effort invested in maintaining clothing highlights how limited resources encouraged durability rather than replacement. Within the village, social interaction was continuous but rarely formal. People encountered one another during shared labor, at the well, near the oven, or while tending animals along common paths. Conversation often centered on immediate concerns: crop progress, health, local disputes, or news carried from nearby towns. Because communities were small, disagreements could not easily be avoided. Resolution, whether through mediation or communal pressure, was necessary to maintain cooperation. Festive gatherings provided opportunities for more relaxed interaction. Seasonal events sometimes included simple games, music played on basic instruments, and communal meals prepared from pooled resources. These moments did not erase hardship, but they reinforced bonds that made collective survival possible. Participation also reaffirmed each person's place within the social fabric. Education, in the formal sense, was limited primarily to those connected with the church or to wealthier households. However, this did not mean that rural populations lacked skill or intelligence. Knowledge was practical, embodied in the ability to judge soil quality by touch, recognize illness in livestock, or estimate approaching weather from subtle environmental cues. Competence was measured by effectiveness in daily tasks rather than by written examination. Disputes occasionally arose over boundaries, grazing rights, or the use of shared resources. Such conflicts were usually addressed through local courts or assemblies where testimony and reputation carried significant weight. Because everyone depended on continued cooperation, prolonged hostility was discouraged. Even when judgments were imperfect, the process aimed to restore functional relationships rather than create permanent division. The presence of roads, though often rough and narrow, created thin lines of connection between otherwise isolated communities. Pilgrims, messengers, and traders moving along these routes brought not only goods but also stories. Tales of distant cities, unusual customs, or political events were received with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. For many listeners, these accounts expanded imagination without fundamentally altering daily priorities. Across all these experiences, a consistent theme emerges. Stability was maintained through repetition. Tasks performed year after year created familiarity that reduced uncertainty. Even when hardship occurred, the known pattern of response, plant again, repair again, gather again, provided psychological steadiness. Life was not free from anxiety, yet it was anchored by expectations shaped over generations. In this environment, identity was closely tied to place. A person was known by family, by the land they worked, and by their role within the village. Movement away from these connections was uncommon and often difficult. As a result, belonging was less an abstract idea and more a daily reality reinforced through shared labor, shared belief, and shared dependence on the same landscape that had sustained their ancestors for centuries. As generations passed within the same landscape, the relationship between people and land developed a depth that was both practical and emotional. Fields were not viewed simply as productive space, but as inherited responsibility. Boundaries, sometimes marked by hedges, stones, or shallow ditches, represented agreements maintained across decades. Remembering where one strip ended and another began was part of communal knowledge, reinforced through repeated seasonal work. This continuity created a strong sense of stewardship. Even households with limited means understood that careless use of soil could reduce future harvests. Techniques such as leaving certain strips fallow allowed the land to recover nutrients. Though these methods were not based on modern agricultural science, they reflected accumulated observation. Villagers recognized, through experience, that overuse without rest led to weaker yields. Animals contributed not only labor and food, but also essential materials. Manure was collected and spread across fields to improve fertility. Wool from sheep became thread and cloth, while hides could be processed into leather for shoes, belts, and harnesses. Very little was discarded. What could not be eaten or worn might still serve as fuel or repair material. This careful use of resources was less a philosophical choice than a necessity shaped by scarcity. Within households, the division of space evolved according to need. Storage areas were arranged to protect grain from dampness, tools from rust, and textiles from pests. Chests and hanging racks were positioned where airflow and heat from the hearth could help preserve contents. These small decisions reflected a continuous effort to extend the life of every possession. Firewood gathering required both effort and awareness of local rules. Deadfall branches were often permitted for collection, while cutting live trees could require permission. Forests were valuable assets controlled by manorial authority, used for timber, hunting, and grazing. For villagers, access to even limited woodland resources could determine whether homes remained warm during colder months. The sensory environment of the medieval countryside changed noticeably with the seasons. In spring, the sounds of birds and moving water returned as ice and frost receded. Summer brought the steady rhythm of tools striking soil and the distant calls of workers across open fields. Autumn carried the dry rustle of harvested stalks and the movement of carts transporting grain. Winter quieted much of this activity, replacing it with the softer sounds of indoor work and the occasional creak of timber in cold air. These sensory patterns contributed to an internal sense of timing that required no written calendar. People anticipated events because they had experienced the same sequence repeatedly since childhood. The first appearance of certain flowers, the behavior of livestock, or the lengthening of daylight all served as signals for changing tasks. Community memory also preserved stories of unusual years, seasons when rains came too heavily, when frost lingered too long, or when harvests exceeded expectation. Such memories were recounted not for entertainment alone, but as guidance. They reminded listeners that hardship was possible, but also temporary. Endurance was framed as a normal part of life rather than an exceptional trial. Craft skills developed gradually within this environment of repetition. A villager who repaired tools each winter improved through practice, producing stronger handles or better balanced implements. Spinners learned to create more even thread, and brewers refined methods that reduced spoilage. These incremental improvements rarely appeared dramatic, yet over decades they increased reliability in daily tasks. Exchange of knowledge occurred informally. Observing a neighbor's more effective technique or a sturdier construction method often led to quiet imitation. Innovation was rarely credited to individuals in a lasting way. Instead, useful changes were absorbed into common practice. In this manner, progress existed, but it was distributed across the community rather than attributed to a single source. The presence of illness or injury could quickly reveal how dependent each household was on collective support. When a primary worker was unable to contribute, others might temporarily assist with essential duties such as harvesting or animal care. This assistance was remembered, creating an informal network of obligation that strengthened long-term cooperation. Survival, once again, was reinforced as a shared responsibility rather than an individual achievement. Through these intertwined relationships between land, animals, tools, memory, and mutual aid, medieval village life maintained a durable balance. It was not a static world, but one in which change moved slowly enough to be integrated without immediate disruption. The pace allowed traditions to persist, skills to mature, and identities to remain closely tied to the same fields that had shaped the lives of countless predecessors. Over time, the stability that defined village life was periodically tested by forces that arrived with little warning. Among the most disruptive were outbreaks of disease, which could move along trade routes or through neighboring regions before their presence was fully understood. In communities where households lived in close proximity and shared tools, wells, and enclosed spaces, illness could spread quickly. The causes were not known in scientific terms, yet patterns were observed. People recognized that certain seasons seemed to bring more sickness, and that crowded conditions often worsened outcomes. Responses to disease combined practical caution with religious interpretation. Families might limit contact where possible, while prayers, processions, and appeals to saints were organized in the hope of relief. When mortality rose, the emotional impact was profound. Small villages, where nearly every face was familiar, felt each loss deeply. Fields might go untended, animals neglected, and routines disrupted as households struggled to adjust to reduced labor. One of the most significant demographic shocks in medieval England came with the arrival of the Black Death in the mid-14th century. Though its immediate devastation varied by region, the long-term consequences were widespread. In some areas, entire households disappeared within weeks. Surviving communities were left with empty cottages, abandoned strips of land, and a silence that contrasted sharply with the previous rhythm of activity. Paradoxically, this sudden reduction in population altered economic relationships. With fewer workers available, labor became more valuable. Some peasants found they could negotiate better terms for their service or seek opportunities beyond their original manner. While traditional obligations did not vanish overnight, the balance between lord and laborer shifted in subtle but lasting ways. What had once seemed fixed began, slowly, to show signs of flexibility. These changes were not always welcomed by those who depended on established hierarchies. Efforts were sometimes made by authorities to reinforce previous expectations through new regulations or taxes. Tension emerged between customary rights and evolving realities. Although large-scale conflict was rare in many villages, underlying strain could persist for years as communities adapted to new conditions. Beyond disease, periods of poor harvest also tested resilience. Consecutive seasons of heavy rain or unseasonal cold could reduce yields to dangerous levels. Grain stores diminished more quickly than planned, and rationing became stricter. During such times, diets narrowed further and physical strength declined, making the next agricultural cycle even more difficult. The memory of famine lingered long after conditions improved, shaping cautious habits in food storage and distribution. Despite these hardships, recovery often occurred through gradual reorganization. Abandoned land might be redistributed, surviving families might combine resources, and new tenants could be encouraged to settle. The landscape itself bore traces of these disruptions. Overgrown strips, repaired dwellings, or redefined boundaries marking where previous arrangements had failed. Religious interpretation provided a framework for understanding both disaster and recovery. Sermons frequently emphasized themes of endurance, humility, and the transient nature of earthly hardship. For many villagers, this perspective offered a form of stability when practical explanations were limited. Faith did not eliminate suffering, but it helped integrate loss into a broader narrative that made continued effort feel meaningful. In the aftermath of crisis, communal rituals became especially important. Shared meals, seasonal festivals, and collective work projects helped restore a sense of normality. These gatherings reaffirmed that, despite absence and change, the village still functioned as a unified body. Re-establishing routine was itself a form of healing, allowing daily life to resume its familiar cadence. Younger generations, growing up after such events, inherited both the physical environment and the stories associated with it. They learned which fields had once stood empty, which families had arrived later, and which customs had been adjusted in response to earlier hardship. In this way, memory of disruption became woven into the identity of the community without dominating its present. Through cycles of loss and recovery, medieval rural society demonstrated a capacity for adaptation that was quiet but persistent. Change did not always arrive through deliberate reform. More often it emerged from necessity. Each challenge, disease, famine, or demographic shift, left subtle marks on how land was managed, how labor was valued, and how relationships were negotiated. Even as these pressures reshaped aspects of daily existence, the fundamental structure of village life remained recognizable. The fields were still plowed, bells still marked the hours, and households still organized their days around the same enduring sequence of tasks. Continuity and change existed side by side, creating a world that evolved slowly while preserving the routines that had long sustained it. As the later medieval centuries unfolded, another gradual transformation began to influence everyday experience. The slow expansion of towns and the increasing presence of skilled, non-agricultural labor. While most people in England still lived in rural settings, certain settlements grew as centers of trade, craft production, and administration. These towns did not replace village life, but they introduced alternative paths that, for a small portion of the population, offered different rhythms and expectations. Within towns, space was more confined and activity more concentrated. Streets were narrower, buildings closer together, and the sound of work more continuous throughout the day. Workshops opened directly onto public lanes, allowing passers-by to see and hear the processes of weaving, metalworking, tanning, or carpentry. For villagers visiting on market days, this environment could feel both energetic and unfamiliar compared to the open quiet of the countryside. Craft guilds emerged as important institutions in these growing urban centers. They regulated training, maintained standards of quality, and protected the economic interests of their members. Apprenticeship offered young people, usually boys from rural or modest backgrounds, a structured path into skilled trades. This system required years of supervised learning, during which discipline, patience, and repetition were emphasized. Success did not guarantee wealth, but it provided stability and a recognized position within the urban community. Despite these opportunities, the decision to leave a village was rarely simple. Families depended on shared labor, and the absence of even one capable worker could strain household survival. Those who did relocate often maintained ties with their place of origin, returning for seasonal visits or maintaining informal support networks. Movement between rural and urban spaces therefore remained limited but meaningful, creating channels through which ideas, techniques, and customs gradually circulated. Markets within towns displayed a wider variety of goods than most villagers would encounter at home. Imported fabrics, metal tools of finer workmanship, spices in small quantities, and written documents produced by professional scribes hinted at a broader world of exchange. These items were not accessible to everyone, yet their presence demonstrated that medieval England was connected to trade routes extending across Europe and beyond. Urban life also required more formal systems of governance. Town councils, charters, and designated officials managed sanitation, trade regulation, and dispute resolution. Compared to village assemblies, these structures were more complex, reflecting the challenges of managing larger populations with diverse occupations. For residents, this meant that rules were increasingly recorded in writing rather than preserved solely through memory and custom. Sanitation presented persistent difficulties in densely populated areas. Waste disposal, water access, and the proximity of animals created conditions that could encourage the spread of disease. While efforts were sometimes made to regulate cleanliness, such as designated dumping areas or restrictions on certain trades within town limits, implementation varied widely. These challenges reinforced the contrast between the relative openness of rural settlements and the crowded nature of expanding towns. Religious life remained central in urban environments, but its expression could differ from that of small villages. Large churches, monasteries, and charitable institutions played visible roles in education, care for the poor, and the organization of public rituals. Processions through town streets, marked by banners and candles, created shared experiences that blended devotion with civic identity. For many residents, participation in these events reinforced both faith and belonging. Economic exchange in towns increasingly relied on coin rather than barter. This shift required familiarity with weights, measures, and negotiated prices. While rural households still operated partly through direct exchange of goods and labor, exposure to monetary transactions gradually influenced expectations even in the countryside. Over time, the idea that work could be compensated through wages, rather than solely through obligation, became more widely understood. Communication between regions improved slowly as administrative networks expanded. Royal officials, merchants, and clergy traveled with greater frequency, carrying letters, records, and news. Although information still moved far more slowly than in the modern world, the intervals between major developments and local awareness began to shorten. This subtle acceleration did not transform daily routines overnight, but it contributed to a growing sense that events beyond the immediate landscape could have tangible local consequences. For most people, however, the core structure of life remained anchored in familiar patterns. Even those who visited towns periodically returned to fields, animals, and seasonal labor. The contrast between environments highlighted how deeply identity was tied to place. Urban spaces offered variety and specialized roles, while villages continued to provide continuity rooted in land and tradition. Through this coexistence of rural stability and gradual urban growth, medieval England developed a more layered social landscape. Change did not arrive as a sudden break from the past, but as an additional set of possibilities layered onto existing customs. The majority still lived within the steady cadence of agricultural time, yet the presence of towns, guilds, and expanding trade networks signaled that the boundaries of everyday experience were, slowly and almost imperceptibly, widening. As these gradual changes accumulated across the later medieval centuries, another quiet but significant shift emerged in how authority and record-keeping were managed. Written documentation, once limited mostly to monasteries and royal administration, began to appear more frequently in local governance. Manorial rolls, tax records, and parish registers slowly expanded the habit of preserving events in ink rather than relying solely on memory. For ordinary people, this did not immediately alter daily routines, but it changed how obligations, ownership, and identity could be recognized over time. The presence of written records meant that boundaries, rents, and agreements could be referenced long after those who originally negotiated them were gone. This introduced a new kind of permanence. Whereas earlier disputes might depend heavily on testimony from elders, documentation provided an additional layer of authority. Even in communities where most individuals remained unable to read, the existence of recorded decisions influenced how confidently rules were enforced. Parish churches played a central role in this transition. Baptisms, marriages, and burials were increasingly noted, creating a continuous account of the community's passage through time. These entries, often brief and practical, nonetheless formed a lasting memory that extended beyond oral tradition. In a world where lifespans were uncertain and families could be reshaped by illness or accident, such records offered a stable thread linking generations. At the same time, the material culture of daily life evolved in subtle ways. Improvements in metalworking produced more durable tools, while advances in weaving created cloth that was slightly finer and more consistent. These were not dramatic technological revolutions, but incremental refinements that reduced failure in routine tasks. A stronger plow tip, for instance, might hold its edge longer through dense soil, saving precious labor during planting seasons. Domestic interiors also showed gradual adaptation. The introduction of more effective chimneys in some regions allowed smoke to be directed upward rather than lingering inside living spaces. This change improved air quality and made interiors marginally brighter, as soot accumulated less heavily on walls and beams. Though such improvements spread unevenly and often slowly, they demonstrate how practical innovation could reshape everyday comfort without altering the broader structure of society. Diet, too, experienced modest variation as trade expanded. While the majority of meals remained based on grain and local produce, small quantities of imported items, such as certain spices or preserved fish, appeared more regularly in market towns and occasionally filtered into rural households. These additions did not transform nutrition dramatically, but they introduced new flavors and signaled participation in wider exchange networks. The role of women within both household and local economy remained substantial, though often underrepresented in formal records. Beyond maintaining domestic space, many contributed directly to production through spinning, dairying, brewing, and small-scale trade. Their labor supported not only family survival but also the circulation of goods within village markets. Knowledge of preservation, herbal treatment, and textile repair was frequently transmitted through female lines, sustaining practical expertise across generations. As communities accumulated experience with both hardship and recovery, expectations around preparation became more deliberate. Households that had endured past shortages were often more cautious in storing surplus when conditions allowed. Extra grain might be hidden against theft or spoilage, and tools were kept in better repair to avoid sudden failure during critical periods. Memory of vulnerability shaped behavior long after immediate danger had passed. Seasonal gatherings continued to reinforce cohesion, yet their tone could shift as populations stabilized after earlier disruptions. Where once festivals might have been marked primarily by relief after survival, they increasingly reflected gratitude for continuity. Music, simple dancing, and shared meals reaffirmed that the community had endured. These occasions also allowed younger members to observe customs that defined belonging, ensuring that traditions persisted even as circumstances evolved. Across the countryside, the visual landscape began to show layers of past decisions. Repaired cottages incorporated older timber alongside newer beams. Field boundaries traced lines established decades earlier, even if ownership had changed. Paths worn by repeated travel connected wells, churches, mills, and grazing land in patterns that remained recognizable over centuries. The environment itself became a record, readable to those familiar with its history. In this manner, late medieval England did not experience change as a sudden departure from tradition, but as a gradual accumulation of adjustments, written records alongside memory, improved tools alongside inherited methods, wider trade alongside local self-sufficiency. Daily life continued to revolve around land, season, and shared obligation, yet the framework supporting that life grew more complex. For the individuals moving through these routines, the world still felt bounded by familiar horizons. The church bells still marked the day, fields still demanded attention, and households still measured success by the security of their stores. Yet beneath this continuity, the quiet expansion of administration, craft, and exchange was preparing the ground for further transformations that future generations would experience more visibly, even as they continued to rely on the enduring rhythms that had long defined life in medieval England. By the closing centuries of the medieval period, the accumulated effects of these gradual adjustments began to shape a society that, while still deeply rooted in tradition, showed clearer signs of transition. The rhythms of agricultural life remained dominant across most of England, yet the expectations surrounding authority, labor, and opportunity were no longer as immovable as they had once seemed. Change did not arrive as a single turning point, but as a slow rebalancing of long-standing relationships. One of the most noticeable developments was the increasing use of wage labor alongside older systems of obligation. In earlier generations, service to a lord had often been defined by customary duties tied directly to land. Over time, however, some of these requirements were commuted into monetary payments. This allowed certain villagers to negotiate how their time was used, exchanging fixed labor days for rent or wages. While this shift was uneven and varied by region, it introduced a subtle sense that effort could be valued in more flexible ways. The presence of coin in everyday exchange gradually altered how people thought about goods and time. Instead of measuring worth solely through harvest yields or livestock, individuals began to consider prices, savings, and future purchases. Even small sums, earned through seasonal work, craft production, or market sales, could be set aside for tools, animals, or improvements to a dwelling. This did not create widespread wealth, but it expanded the range of choices available to some households. Land itself also became subject to changing patterns of management. In certain areas, fields that had long been worked in common were reorganized into more clearly defined holdings. Enclosures, whether partial or temporary, allowed landholders to experiment with different uses, including expanded pasture for sheep. These changes sometimes improved efficiency, yet they could also reduce access to shared resources that poorer families had depended upon for grazing or gathering fuel. As a result, communities occasionally faced tension between innovation and tradition. Within villages, generational differences became more visible. Younger individuals who had grown up after earlier crises, such as severe disease or famine, often encountered a landscape with different opportunities than their grandparents had known. Empty land that had once been abundant might now be reclaimed, while new economic expectations encouraged mobility. A few chose to seek work in towns for part of the year, returning home with wages or unfamiliar ideas about organization and trade. Education, though still limited, showed modest expansion through cathedral schools and parish instruction. The ability to read simple texts or understand basic accounting became increasingly valuable in administrative and commercial settings. While literacy remained far from universal, its gradual spread influenced how information circulated. Written notices, contracts, and letters began to complement spoken communication, allowing messages to travel with greater precision across distance. Religious life continued to anchor moral understanding, yet it also reflected broader social change. Sermons and devotional practices increasingly addressed themes of personal responsibility, charity, and ethical conduct within a more complex economic world. Guilds, confraternities, and charitable foundations in towns created organized networks of support that extended beyond immediate family ties. These institutions provided assistance during illness, arranged burials, and reinforced shared identity among members of specific trades or neighborhoods. Material surroundings likewise revealed incremental improvement. Some homes incorporated sturdier stone foundations or more durable roofing materials where resources allowed. Glass windows, though still uncommon, appeared in wealthier households and religious buildings, admitting more light while protecting interiors from wind and rain. Such features were subtle markers of changing craftsmanship and access to specialized production. Despite these developments, uncertainty remained a constant presence. Harvest outcomes were still dependent on weather and political conflicts. Whether local disputes or larger national struggles could interrupt trade and stability, communities therefore balanced cautious optimism with long-practiced preparedness. Surplus, when available, was still stored carefully, and mutual aid remained essential in times of shortage. Social identity continued to be shaped by reputation and visible contribution to communal life. Participation in shared labor, attendance at religious observances, and adherence to customary expectations influenced how individuals were regarded by neighbors. Even as economic relationships grew more varied, trust was still built through consistency and reliability rather than formal documentation alone. In many respects, the late medieval village stood at the intersection of continuity and emerging possibility. The fields were still divided by familiar boundaries, bells still signaled the passage of each day, and households still organized their efforts around the turning of seasons. Yet beneath this enduring structure, new forms of exchange, record-keeping, and labor were quietly expanding the range of experiences available to future generations. For those living within this world, these changes were rarely perceived as part of a grand historical shift. They were encountered as practical adjustments, slightly different rents, new tools in a market stall, unfamiliar coins changing hands, or a neighbor's child leaving to apprentice in a distant town. Life continued to be measured in harvests and winters, but the framework surrounding those measures was slowly, almost imperceptibly, evolving toward a society that would, in time, move beyond the medieval order while still carrying many of its habits forward. As the medieval era gradually approached its later threshold, the sense of continuity that had defined village existence for centuries began to coexist with a growing awareness that the world beyond local fields was becoming more active and interconnected. Travelers, merchants, clergy, and officials moved with slightly greater frequency along established routes, and with them came not only goods, but observations about distant regions. These accounts did not arrive as dramatic revelations, but as steady additions to a widening mental map of England and the lands beyond it. For many villagers, this expanding awareness remained indirect. News was still received in fragments, shared at market crossings, repeated after church gatherings, or carried by those who had briefly worked outside the immediate area. Even so, repeated exposure to such information gradually reduced the sense that each community existed in isolation. The knowledge that similar routines, obligations, and challenges were experienced elsewhere contributed to a broader, though still limited, sense of belonging within a larger realm. Royal authority, once felt mainly through taxation or occasional legal summons, became more visible through standardized practices. Coinage bearing recognizable symbols circulated more widely, and certain legal expectations were applied with increasing consistency across regions. While most individuals never encountered royal officials directly, the presence of uniform measures, such as accepted weights, tolls, or written proclamations, reinforced the idea that governance extended beyond the manor. Infrastructure, though still modest by later standards, showed incremental improvement. Bridges replaced some unreliable fords, making river crossings safer during seasonal floods. Maintained sections of road allowed carts to move with slightly greater efficiency, supporting more regular trade between rural producers and urban markets. These developments did not eliminate the difficulties of travel, but they reduced some of the uncertainty that had long accompanied movement between settlements. Within households, expectations about comfort and order continued to evolve in small but meaningful ways. The separation of spaces, sleeping areas, storage corners, and work surfaces became more deliberate where resources permitted. Even modest attempts to keep tools organized or food stores protected from damp reflected an increasing attention to efficiency. These adjustments were rarely recorded, yet they influenced how daily tasks were performed and how time was managed within confined interiors. Food preparation also benefited from accumulated experience. Methods of salting, drying, and fermenting were refined through repetition, reducing the likelihood of spoilage. Shared knowledge about which herbs improved preservation or flavor circulated informally, often passed between neighboring households. Such practices did not eliminate the risk of scarcity, but they improved the reliability of supplies during difficult seasons. Community responsibility remained a central pillar of stability. When repairs were needed, whether to a shared oven, a boundary fence, or a section of roadway, labor was often organized collectively. Participation reaffirmed membership within the social body, while absence could invite quiet disapproval. These expectations were rarely written, yet they were widely understood and reinforced through long-standing custom. At the same time, subtle distinctions in wealth and opportunity became more noticeable. A household with an additional animal, a sturdier cart, or a slightly larger store of grain possessed advantages that could accumulate across years. These differences did not always produce sharp division, but they influenced marriage prospects, informal leadership, and the ability to withstand poor harvests. Social structure remained hierarchical, yet it contained degrees of variation that were recognized without overt display. Religious observance continued to provide both explanation and reassurance amid uncertainty. Seasonal services marked transitions in the agricultural year, while prayers for favorable weather or protection from illness reflected the enduring connection between spiritual belief and practical survival. Churches, with their familiar stone walls and steady rituals, offered a sense of permanence in a landscape where fortunes could change with a single failed season. Younger generations, raised within this environment of gradual expansion and subtle differentiation, inherited a world that was still recognizably medieval yet quietly shifting. They learned the same field boundaries, the same prayers, and the same seasonal tasks as their predecessors, but they also encountered more frequent references to distant towns, broader trade, and evolving expectations about labor and exchange. Their understanding of possibility, though still constrained, extended slightly beyond the horizon known to earlier ancestors. Through these overlapping developments, everyday life maintained its steady cadence while absorbing new influences. The village remained centered on land, community, and shared obligation, yet it was no longer entirely insulated from wider currents. Change moved at a pace slow enough to preserve familiarity, allowing traditions to persist even as the framework surrounding them grew more connected, more structured, and gradually more complex. As the medieval period drew closer to its transition into the early modern age, the cumulative effect of small adjustments began to shape a society that felt both familiar and subtly altered. For most villagers, daily routines still began with the same obligations to animals, fields, and household maintenance. Yet the expectations surrounding authority, exchange, and personal mobility were no longer defined solely by inherited custom. Instead, tradition now existed alongside emerging alternatives that, while limited, offered new ways of organizing work and responsibility. One area where this shift became noticeable was in the growing presence of short-term labor arrangements. Rather than serving exclusively through fixed duties tied to a manor, some individuals could offer their skills seasonally in nearby regions. Harvest periods, construction projects, and transport of goods created temporary demand for additional hands. These opportunities did not free people entirely from established obligations, but they introduced the idea that effort might be directed where it was most needed, sometimes in exchange for coin or goods rather than long-standing service. This gradual flexibility influenced how households planned for the future. Younger members, observing that neighbors occasionally traveled for work, began to consider paths that extended beyond the immediate village. Such decisions were rarely taken lightly, as leaving even briefly meant reduced support at home. Still, the possibility itself represented a quiet expansion of personal choice within a system that had once appeared largely fixed. Material improvements, though modest, continued to accumulate. Iron tools became slightly more reliable as smithing techniques advanced through repeated practice and shared knowledge. Better-fitted hinges, stronger nails, and more durable harness fittings reduced the frequency of sudden failures that could interrupt essential tasks. These refinements did not transform labor into ease, but they lowered the constant risk that a broken implement would halt progress during critical seasons. The organization of storage also reflected increased attention to long-term security. Elevated granaries, improved lids for chests, and the careful separation of seed grain from food supplies helped households manage risk more effectively. Experience had taught communities that survival often depended on preserving a portion of resources untouched, even when immediate needs pressed heavily. This discipline was reinforced by memory. Stories of past shortages served as reminders of the cost of overconfidence. Within the broader landscape, the appearance of more defined property markers indicated changing attitudes toward land use. Hedges were maintained with greater care, ditches cleared, and boundary stones reset when disturbed. These efforts were practical, reducing disputes over grazing or cultivation, but they also reflected a growing emphasis on clarity in ownership and responsibility. Land remained the central measure of stability, and protecting its defined limits became increasingly important. Religious institutions continued to anchor moral and social life, yet they too adapted to a changing environment. Sermons addressed questions of fair exchange, honest measurement, and responsible stewardship, acknowledging that economic interactions were becoming more varied. Charitable practices, including alms and organized support for the vulnerable, helped communities absorb the uneven effects of change without fragmenting social cohesion. Sound and rhythm within daily life still followed ancient patterns. The ringing bell called villagers to prayer, signaled gatherings, and marked significant moments in the communal calendar. The steady repetition of these sounds provided continuity even as other aspects of society evolved. For individuals whose world was defined by routine, such familiar signals offered reassurance that, despite gradual transformation, the essential order of life remained intact. Seasonal festivals retained their importance as markers of shared identity. Harvest celebrations, winter feasts, and spring observances allowed communities to acknowledge both dependence on the land and gratitude for survival through another cycle. Music, simple decoration, and shared meals strengthened bonds that economic change alone could not replace. Participation reaffirmed belonging, reminding each household that its fortunes were tied to the well-being of neighbors. In this environment, knowledge continued to pass primarily through observation and repetition. Even as written records became more common, the most immediate lessons, how to judge soil moisture, when to rotate grazing, how to recognize illness in livestock, were still learned by watching experienced hands at work. Practical competence remained the foundation of respect within the community, outweighing abstract instruction. By the threshold of a new era, medieval England's villages had not abandoned their traditional structure. Fields were still worked in familiar patterns, households still organized around the hearth, and community expectations still guided behavior. Yet beneath this continuity lay a network of subtle changes. Greater movement of people, clearer definitions of property, improved tools, and more varied forms of exchange that collectively prepared society for transformations that would become more visible in the centuries ahead. For those living through this period, however, history did not feel like a turning point. Life continued to be measured in planting seasons, successful harvests, and the steady passage of years marked by births, marriages, and quiet burials. The medieval world did not end with a sudden break, but with a gradual blending of old habits and new possibilities, carried forward by ordinary people whose daily routines remained the enduring foundation of England's evolving landscape. As the long medieval centuries eased toward their conclusion, the accumulated habits of rural life remained deeply embedded in both landscape and memory. Fields that had been divided and worked for generations still followed familiar lines, and many of the paths connecting cottages, wells, mills, and churches were worn by the repeated footsteps of countless seasons. These physical traces served as quiet evidence that continuity was not simply cultural, but also inscribed into the ground itself. Yet beneath this enduring surface, the expectations surrounding authority and responsibility continued to adjust in measured ways. Local officials, reeves, bailiffs, and parish wardens operated with increasing reliance on written accounts, ensuring that rents, duties, and shared obligations were recorded with greater consistency. For villagers, this meant that agreements once maintained largely through custom were now supported by documents that could outlast individual memory. The shift did not remove negotiation or disagreement, but it reduced uncertainty about what had been promised or owed. The presence of more consistent record-keeping also influenced inheritance. Land, tools, and livestock passed between generations with clearer acknowledgement of ownership. Families could point to written entries as confirmation of claims, strengthening the sense that property was not only held by tradition but recognized through formal authority. This added stability, though modest, helped reduce disputes that might otherwise have strained relationships within small communities. At the same time, the wider English economy showed signs of diversification. Cloth production, supported by improved spinning and weaving practices, connected rural wool growers to workshops in expanding towns. Even when villagers did not participate directly in manufacturing, they were aware that their flocks contributed to goods traded beyond their region. This awareness reinforced the idea that local effort could carry influence farther than the immediate market square. Transportation, though still slow, benefited from incremental maintenance. Bridges were repaired more regularly, and certain routes were kept passable to support trade and administrative travel. Carts fitted with sturdier wheels could carry heavier loads with less risk of breakage. These practical improvements reduced the isolation that had once defined many settlements, allowing information and goods to circulate with slightly greater reliability. Within the household, attention to order and efficiency continued to evolve. Cooking areas were arranged to better manage heat, storage spaces organized to separate dry goods from items prone to spoilage, and tools placed where they could be reached quickly during busy seasons. Such refinements were rarely dramatic, yet they saved time and reduced waste, advantages that accumulated quietly across years. Social relationships within villages also reflected a balance between hierarchy and cooperation. While distinctions in landholding and obligation remained visible, daily survival still depended on mutual assistance. Neighbors shared labor during demanding tasks, lent animals for plowing when one household faced difficulty, and provided temporary care during illness. These exchanges reinforced a network of trust that functioned alongside formal authority rather than being replaced by it. Religious observance continued to shape both calendar and conscience. The familiar cycle of services, feast days, and fasting periods offered structure that extended beyond practical necessity. Churches provided not only spiritual guidance but also a setting where collective identity was reaffirmed. The repetition of prayers, hymns, and ritual gestures connected present experience with that of previous generations, creating a sense that time moved forward without severing ties to the past. Younger members of the community, raised within this environment of steady adaptation, learned to navigate both inherited custom and emerging expectation. They observed elders who still relied on memory and tradition, while also encountering officials who consulted written rolls and accounts. This coexistence of old and new forms of authority shaped how responsibility was understood, no longer solely preserved in spoken agreement, but increasingly supported by recorded evidence. The natural world remained the constant frame within which all these changes occurred. Seasons continued to dictate when soil could be turned, when animals required shelter, and when stores needed careful rationing. Weather, as ever, held the power to reward or disrupt months of preparation. Despite incremental improvements in tools or organization, dependence on climate ensured that humility toward nature remained an essential part of daily outlook. By this stage, medieval England's rural communities embodied a layered continuity. Ancient patterns of cooperation, belief, and land use persisted, even as documentation, trade, and modest technological refinements introduced new forms of stability. Life was still measured in harvests and winters, yet the structures supporting that life had become more intricate. For those who lived within these villages, the passage from one era to the next was not marked by a clear boundary. Instead, it unfolded through subtle adjustments, slightly improved roads, more reliable records, broader markets, and evolving expectations about work and exchange. The medieval world, shaped over centuries by repetition and resilience, did not disappear abruptly. It gradually transformed, carrying forward its rhythms, its habits, and its deeply rooted connection between people, land, and community into the centuries that followed. In the quiet transition from the late medieval period into the early modern landscape, one of the most enduring features of everyday life remained the relationship between memory and place. Villagers continued to interpret their surroundings not as anonymous terrain, but as a living record of past effort. A repaired fence, an older beam within a newer cottage wall, or a field whose soil behaved differently after rain all carried stories that were repeated across generations. These observations did not require written explanation. They were understood through familiarity built over years of repeated experience. As communities accumulated these layers of shared knowledge, the importance of routine became even more apparent. Predictable sequences of work reduced uncertainty in an environment where many factors, especially weather, remained beyond human control. Beginning tasks at the same time each season, following established methods for planting or harvesting, and maintaining familiar storage practices created a framework that helped households manage risk. Consistency itself functioned as a form of security. The gradual spread of more standardized measures also influenced daily transactions. Weights used in markets, agreed units for grain, and commonly recognized coin values reduced confusion during exchange. While bargaining still occurred, shared reference points allowed trade to proceed with fewer disputes. For rural producers, this meant that surplus goods could be converted into tools or supplies with greater confidence that value would be recognized fairly. At the same time, expectations around accountability grew more defined. When obligations, whether rents, labor days, or shared maintenance duties, were recorded, it became easier to confirm who was responsible for specific tasks. This clarity did not eliminate disagreement, but it reduced reliance on fragile memory alone. Over time, the presence of written acknowledgement subtly shifted how trust was established, combining reputation with documented agreement. Domestic life continued to revolve around the hearth, yet improvements in construction slowly altered comfort levels. Better fitted doors reduced drafts, more carefully thatched roofs shed rain more effectively, and raised sleeping platforms helped separate bedding from damp ground. None of these changes transformed living conditions into luxury, but they demonstrate how accumulated craft knowledge could produce steady, practical gains. Food preparation likewise reflected a blend of tradition and refinement. Techniques for baking, brewing, and preserving were passed down with careful attention to detail. The timing of fermentation, the ratio of grain to water, and the selection of herbs were adjusted through observation. Even minor improvements, such as more consistent oven heat or cleaner storage vessels, reduced waste and illness, strengthening the reliability of household supplies. Community oversight remained an essential element of village stability. Informal observation ensured that shared resources were used responsibly. If a boundary hedge fell into disrepair or a path became obstructed, neighbors expected corrective action without the need for formal instruction. This quiet system of mutual awareness functioned as a practical form of governance, sustained by the understanding that neglect in one area could affect everyone. Seasonal labor continued to anchor emotional rhythms as well as economic survival. The tension of planting, the urgency of harvest, and the relative stillness of winter shaped mood across the year. Moments of completion, when grain was safely stored or animals secured, brought a sense of relief that was shared collectively. These emotional cycles, repeated annually, reinforced patience and long-term thinking. Religious spaces maintained their role as centers of reflection and continuity. Stone walls worn smooth by centuries of touch, familiar prayers recited in measured cadence, and the steady glow of candles created an atmosphere that contrasted with the unpredictability of daily labor. For many, these settings provided reassurance that, despite hardship, life followed a meaningful order. Younger generations growing within this environment absorbed both inherited caution and emerging awareness. They learned the necessity of careful storage and cooperative labor, while also hearing more frequent references to distant markets, administrative changes, or new tools appearing in regional trade. Their outlook combined respect for established practice with curiosity about gradual innovation. Through these overlapping influences, everyday life at the close of the medieval tradition remained grounded in repetition yet open to adjustment. The village continued to function as a tightly woven network of shared effort, belief, and memory. Change arrived not as disruption, but as a series of small accommodations, each one integrated into routine until it felt as though it had always been there. In this way, the passage from medieval to later forms of society was experienced less as an ending than as a continuation shaped by accumulated experience. The same fields were tilled, the same bells marked the hours, and the same communal expectations guided behavior. Yet beneath these familiar patterns, the foundations of administration, exchange, and craft had grown more structured, preparing communities to navigate a world that would become steadily more connected, while still carrying the enduring imprint of medieval life. As this long continuity extended into the generations that followed, one of the most defining characteristics of rural life remained its dependence on predictability. In an environment where unexpected disruption could threaten survival, habits were preserved not out of resistance to change, but because they had repeatedly proven reliable. Methods that worked, even if imperfect, were preferred over untested alternatives. This practical conservatism allowed communities to endure periods of uncertainty without abandoning the structures that had sustained them for centuries. The passing of knowledge within families continued to rely heavily on demonstration rather than explanation. A child learned when to turn soil by watching the color and texture shift under a parent's hand. The correct way to stack thatch, store root vegetables, or judge whether grain was sufficiently dry was absorbed through repetition. These lessons were rarely spoken in formal terms. They were embedded in daily activity. Over time, skill became instinct, and instinct became tradition. Landscape features themselves acted as guides for behavior. Slight rises in ground indicated safer locations for storage during wet seasons. Areas where frost lingered longer were planted later. Paths that remained firm after rain became preferred routes for moving carts. Such observations accumulated gradually, forming a practical map that existed in memory rather than on parchment. Even newcomers to a village had to learn these subtleties if they hoped to avoid costly mistakes. The relationship between people and animals also reflected careful adaptation. Livestock were not only sources of food and labor but indicators of environmental change. Unusual restlessness, altered feeding patterns, or changes in milk production could signal shifts in weather or disease. Attentive observation allowed households to respond early, adjusting shelter or feed before problems became severe. This attentiveness was part of a broader culture of watching closely and acting cautiously. Within the social structure, respect was often granted to those who demonstrated consistency over time. Reliability, arriving when expected, maintaining shared equipment, honoring agreements, carried more weight than displays of wealth or ambition. In small communities where cooperation was essential, predictable behavior reduced risk for everyone involved. Reputation, once established, influenced opportunities for partnership, assistance, and informal leadership. The physical maintenance of the village required continuous effort. Roofs needed periodic rethatching, fences weakened by weather had to be reinforced, and drainage ditches cleared to prevent standing water. These tasks were rarely dramatic, yet neglect could quickly lead to larger problems. Regular upkeep represented an investment in stability, ensuring that structures built by previous generations remained useful rather than falling into disrepair. Seasonal storage practices continued to evolve through careful trial and error. Clay-lined pits, raised wooden bins, and improved sealing methods reduced losses to moisture and pests. Households that succeeded in preserving even a small additional portion of their harvest gained valuable security against late winter scarcity. Over decades, these marginal gains contributed to a slow improvement in resilience across the community. The presence of regional markets and administrative centers, though still distant for many, reinforced the understanding that local life existed within a broader framework. Coins bearing familiar markings, standardized measures for grain, and occasional written notices reminded villagers that their routines were connected to systems extending beyond immediate fields. This awareness did not diminish local identity. Instead, it layered a wider sense of belonging atop deeply rooted attachments to place. Religious observance continued to provide a shared language for interpreting both success and hardship. Good harvests were met with gratitude, while poor seasons prompted reflection and renewed appeals for guidance. Rituals offered a consistent structure through which uncertainty could be processed collectively. The repetition of these practices across generations strengthened the perception that, despite changing circumstances, the underlying order of life endured. For younger villagers, growing up within this environment meant inheriting both caution and confidence. Caution shaped by stories of past shortages or illness, and confidence grounded in the visible endurance of their community. They saw that cottages were repaired rather than abandoned, that fields recovered after difficult seasons, and that cooperation repeatedly restored balance. This experience fostered patience, an understanding that stability was maintained not by sudden transformation but by steady attention to small responsibilities. Through these quiet processes, the legacy of medieval rural life persisted as more than a historical phase. It functioned as a living pattern of behavior, sustained by observation, repetition, and shared expectation. Even as administrative structures, trade networks, and material tools continued to evolve, the fundamental rhythm of daily existence, guided by land, season, and community, remained recognizable. In this enduring rhythm, history reveals itself not only through dramatic events, but through the persistence of ordinary actions repeated across generations. The steady tending of animals, the careful storage of grain, the repair of a worn fence, and the gathering of neighbors for shared work all formed the foundation upon which broader social change gradually unfolded. The medieval world, shaped by these countless small decisions, carried its influence forward, quietly, steadily, and almost invisibly, into the lives that followed. In the long perspective of centuries, what becomes most striking about everyday life shaped by medieval traditions is not the presence of hardship alone, but the persistence of structure. Daily existence was organized around patterns that proved dependable across unpredictable conditions. These patterns were rarely written as formal rules. Instead, they were reinforced through habit, expectation, and shared memory. Over time, repetition created a sense of order that helped individuals navigate a world where many forces, weather, illness, political demands, remained outside their control. Morning routines, for example, followed sequences that required little deliberation. Fires were checked, animals tended, and tools gathered in a familiar order. This predictability reduced wasted effort and ensured that essential tasks were completed before daylight diminished. Even slight deviations, an absent tool, a damaged gate, or a delayed start, were quickly noticed because they disrupted a rhythm practiced since childhood. The same reliance on sequence appeared in food preparation. Grain was ground, mixed, and baked according to methods refined through long experience. Brewing followed measured steps that balanced timing and temperature as best as conditions allowed. These activities were not viewed as creative experiments, but as processes where consistency increased the chance of success. In an environment where failure carried serious consequences, dependable repetition was valued more highly than novelty. Shared spaces within the village reflected similar principles. Wells were approached in an orderly manner, ovens used according to understood schedules, and grazing areas accessed through customary rotation. These arrangements minimized conflict by establishing clear expectations. Because everyone depended on the same limited resources, cooperation was less an ideal than a practical necessity. Disruption to shared order risked harming not just one household, but the entire community. Seasonal markers reinforced this collective structure. The first plowing, the beginning of lambing, the cutting of hay, and the gathering of harvest were events recognized by all. Their timing was discussed, anticipated, and remembered. When seasons arrived earlier or later than expected, the deviation was felt not only in workload but in emotional tone. Familiar landmarks in the year provided reassurance. Their absence created unease. The architecture of the village also embodied continuity. Cottages were repaired using the same techniques with which they had been built, incorporating new materials alongside older timber and stone. This layering of construction preserved practical knowledge. Each repair served as a reminder of previous solutions, allowing future generations to maintain structures without needing formal instruction manuals. Buildings themselves became repositories of experience. Sound continued to function as a guide to shared time. The bell's steady rhythm marked transitions between work, prayer, and rest. Its tone carried across fields and through narrow lanes, providing a common reference that synchronized activity. In a world without personal timekeeping devices, such signals ensured that communal obligations, gatherings, services, or coordinated labor could proceed without confusion. The persistence of these patterns did not mean that individuals lacked personal variation. Within the framework of shared expectation, households developed small preferences, slightly different methods of storing tools, particular herbs favored in cooking, or unique arrangements of interior space. These distinctions added texture to daily life while remaining compatible with broader custom. Individual identity existed, but it was expressed within boundaries shaped by collective necessity. As broader economic and administrative systems slowly expanded, these local patterns proved resilient. New forms of record-keeping, trade, and governance were often absorbed without replacing established routines. A written account might confirm a rent, yet the act of delivering grain still followed the same path walked for decades. Coin might supplement barter, but the timing of exchange remained tied to harvest cycles. In this way, innovation layered itself onto tradition rather than displacing it entirely. Emotional resilience was also strengthened by familiarity. Knowing what to expect, when work would intensify, when rest might be possible, when stores were typically at their lowest, allowed communities to prepare mentally as well as physically. Anticipation reduced panic during difficult periods, replacing it with cautious endurance. The shared understanding that hardship had been survived before made future challenges feel manageable, even when circumstances were severe. For younger generations, growing into adulthood meant gradually internalizing this web of sequences and signals. They learned not only tasks but timing, not only responsibilities, but the order in which those responsibilities unfolded. Mastery was measured by how smoothly one could participate in the established rhythm without needing instruction. In this sense, competence was defined as harmony with the flow of communal life. Viewed from a distance, the medieval inheritance within everyday English society appears less as a static relic and more as a durable framework, one capable of accommodating gradual change while preserving stability. The repeated actions of ordinary people, performed with patience and attention, sustained communities through centuries of uncertainty. In their quiet persistence, these routines formed the foundation upon which later developments would build, ensuring that even as new influences emerged, the underlying cadence of life, guided by land, season, and shared responsibility, remained steady and recognizable. When viewed across many generations, the endurance of these routines reveals how stability was constructed not from grand decisions, but from countless small actions repeated with care. Each repaired fence, each carefully measured portion of seed, and each shared day of labor reinforced a system that depended on attention rather than innovation. The success of a village rarely hinged on dramatic change. Instead, it rested on whether ordinary tasks were performed reliably, season after season. This reliability shaped how people understood responsibility. Duties were not perceived as abstract obligations imposed from afar, but as practical necessities visible in daily outcomes. If animals were neglected, their weakness became immediately apparent. If drainage ditches were left uncleared, standing water would damage nearby fields. Cause and effect were experienced directly, encouraging a mindset that valued steady maintenance over occasional bursts of effort. The landscape itself responded to this consistency. Fields that were rotated carefully retained fertility longer. Paths kept clear of obstruction allowed smoother movement of carts and livestock. Wells protected from contamination remained dependable sources of water. Over time, these maintained elements created an environment that appeared naturally functional, even though its stability depended on continuous human attention. Community cooperation played a decisive role in sustaining this balance. Tasks that exceeded the capacity of a single household, such as repairing a mill wheel, reinforcing a bridge, or gathering a large harvest, were organized collectively. Participation was expected not simply because labor was required, but because shared effort ensured that essential structures remained available to all. In this way, cooperation was less an expression of idealism and more a practical strategy for survival. Reputation continued to act as a form of social currency. Individuals known for reliability found it easier to request assistance or negotiate favorable exchanges. Those who repeatedly neglected communal expectations faced quiet exclusion from opportunities. This system required no formal enforcement. Memory within a small population was sufficient to track patterns of behavior over many years. The gradual refinement of tools further supported dependable routines. A slightly sharper blade, a better balanced handle, or a more secure harness reduced fatigue and improved efficiency. These improvements were rarely attributed to a single moment of invention. Instead, they emerged through incremental adjustments shared among neighbors and passed to the next generation. Progress in this context was cumulative and collective. Inside the household, similar principles guided daily organization. Items were stored where they could be reached quickly, fuel kept dry to ensure reliable fire, and work surfaces arranged to reduce unnecessary movement. Such decisions saved small amounts of time and effort, but across weeks and months the savings became significant. Efficiency was achieved not through speed, but through thoughtful placement and habit. Seasonal transitions remained the primary markers of long-term planning. The approach of winter prompted careful inspection of roofs, walls, and stored provisions. Spring demanded preparation of soil and repair of tools. Because these cycles were predictable, preparation could begin before urgency arrived. Anticipation, rather than reaction, reduced the impact of sudden difficulty. Religious observance continued to provide a shared framework for reflection during these transitions. Prayers offered before planting or after harvest acknowledged dependence on forces beyond human control. Rituals marking birth, marriage, and death connected individual lives to a larger narrative that extended beyond any single generation. These practices did not change material conditions directly, but they reinforced emotional steadiness within uncertain environments. As administrative and commercial networks slowly expanded, villages incorporated new elements without abandoning established rhythms. Written notices might announce a levy or regulation, yet the method of gathering payment still followed familiar paths. Coins might pass through local markets, but exchanges were timed according to agricultural availability. Tradition acted as a stable foundation upon which new structures could be layered. For the young, learning to live within this system meant absorbing both patience and attentiveness. They observed that success was rarely immediate, and that the results of careful preparation often appeared months later at harvest. This long view encouraged decisions based on continuity rather than short-term gain. The future was imagined not as a break from the past, but as its extension. Across these quiet patterns, the essence of everyday life shaped by medieval experience becomes clear. Stability was not accidental. It was produced through repeated cooperation, practical observation, and respect for limits imposed by land and season. Even as broader historical forces introduced gradual transformation, the enduring cadence of routine ensured that communities remained functional. In this steady persistence, the legacy of medieval rural society continued to influence how people organized work, shared responsibility, and understood their place within the landscape. The passage of time did not erase these habits. Instead, it carried them forward, embedding their logic into later generations who, often without conscious awareness, continued to rely on the same patient, methodical approach that had sustained their predecessors for centuries. Across the span of many lifetimes, the most enduring lesson embedded within this way of life was the value of continuity. Continuity did not imply stagnation, but rather the careful preservation of methods that had demonstrated their usefulness. Each generation inherited a set of practices shaped by long experience: how to prepare soil, how to divide labor across the day, how to store food against damp and pests, and these practices were refined rather than replaced. Stability emerged from this patient accumulation of small improvements. The experience of work itself followed a tempo that encouraged endurance instead of urgency. Tasks were often repetitive, requiring steady attention rather than bursts of speed. Plowing a field, mending a fence, or spinning thread demanded rhythm and consistency. This pace reduced mistakes and conserved energy across long days. Over time, individuals learned to match their effort to sustainable patterns, recognizing that exhaustion early in the season could weaken productivity when it mattered most. Rest, though limited, was integrated into the structure of the day. Short pauses taken at familiar points, after animals were fed, when the sun reached a certain height, or following the completion of a shared task, allowed recovery without disrupting overall progress. These intervals were not idle luxuries. They were practical measures that maintained strength across demanding cycles of labor. Communities understood that measured effort preserved capability over months rather than hours. The transmission of responsibility from one generation to the next occurred gradually. Younger members first observed, then assisted, and eventually led specific tasks. This progression ensured that knowledge was absorbed through experience rather than imposed abruptly. By the time individuals assumed full responsibility for fields or households, their actions were guided by years of practiced familiarity. Mistakes still occurred, yet the surrounding community provided correction before consequences became severe. Natural landmarks continued to serve as reference points for planning. The angle of sunlight across a familiar ridge, the timing of river levels after seasonal rain, or the flowering of particular plants all indicated when certain work should begin. These signals were consistent enough to guide decisions without written calendars. Even as administrative systems introduced more formal dating, practical timing still relied heavily on environmental observation. Shared memory remained a powerful stabilizing force. Stories of past hardship, years when crops failed or illness spread, were repeated not to dwell on loss, but to preserve caution. Likewise, recollections of abundant seasons reminded listeners that recovery was possible. This balance between warning and reassurance shaped collective expectations, encouraging preparation without surrendering hope. Material possessions continued to be valued for durability rather than novelty. A well-made tool repaired many times was trusted more than an unfamiliar replacement. Clothing patched carefully could serve through multiple seasons. This emphasis on longevity reduced dependence on uncertain supply and reinforced respect for craftsmanship. Objects carried histories of use, linking present effort with earlier hands that had shaped and maintained them. Community gatherings retained their role as moments when individual concerns were set aside in favor of shared identity. Whether repairing infrastructure, marking a religious observance, or celebrating the completion of harvest, these events reaffirmed that survival depended on cooperation. Participation strengthened trust, while absence was noticed precisely because each person's contribution mattered within a small population. As broader economic networks continued to expand, villages interacted with them selectively. Goods that improved reliability, stronger metal fittings, better millstones, more consistent measuring tools were adopted when available. Yet the core organization of daily life remained grounded in land and season. External influence was filtered through practical necessity, ensuring that change supported rather than disrupted established balance. Emotional resilience was sustained by the predictability of this structure. Knowing that the year would unfold through recognizable stages, preparation, growth, harvest, and rest, provided reassurance even when outcomes varied. Individuals could endure uncertainty because the sequence itself remained dependable. In this sense, routine functioned as a form of quiet stability that required no formal explanation. By the time later centuries introduced more visible transformations in governance, technology, and trade, many foundational habits shaped during the medieval period still guided behavior. People continued to organize effort around daylight, to value careful storage, and to rely on neighbors during moments of strain. These practices persisted because they addressed fundamental realities that had not changed: the limits of the environment, the importance of cooperation, and the necessity of planning beyond immediate need. Through this long continuity, everyday life reveals a pattern often overlooked in accounts focused on kings and conflict. The steady repetition of ordinary actions, performed with patience and attention, created a durable framework that allowed communities to adapt without losing coherence. The medieval inheritance, carried forward through habit rather than proclamation, remained visible in the measured pace of work, the shared management of resources, and the enduring trust placed in methods proven across generations. Seen from this extended perspective, the quiet endurance of everyday practices reveals how communities sustained themselves without dramatic intervention. Stability was achieved through alignment between effort and season, between expectation and resource, and between individual needs and collective responsibility. When these elements remained in balance, life proceeded with a steadiness that required little explanation. When they drifted out of alignment, even slightly, the effects were quickly felt across the village. This sensitivity to imbalance encouraged a habit of early correction. A weakened fence was repaired before livestock could wander. A diminishing store of grain prompted immediate rationing. A tool showing signs of wear was reinforced before it failed under pressure. Such preventative action was not framed as foresight in abstract terms. It was simply understood as the practical way to avoid larger hardship later. Over time, this approach reduced the frequency of crises severe enough to threaten the entire community. The shared nature of risk also influenced how success was interpreted. A good harvest was rarely viewed as the achievement of one household alone. Favorable weather, cooperative labor, and functioning shared infrastructure all contributed. Gratitude, therefore, was often expressed collectively through offerings, communal meals, or quiet acknowledgement during gatherings. This perspective helped prevent rivalry from undermining cooperation, reinforcing the understanding that prosperity was interconnected. Attention to detail became a defining skill within this environment. The difference between damp and properly dried grain, between a secure knot and a loose one, or between a well-set beam and a shifting support could determine whether resources lasted through the season. Such distinctions required patience and close observation. Over years of repetition, individuals developed an intuitive sense for these subtleties, allowing them to act before problems became visible to the untrained eye. The pace of communication, though slow by later standards, encouraged reflection. News carried from nearby towns or distant regions was discussed carefully, compared with existing knowledge, and integrated gradually into local understanding. Because information did not arrive in overwhelming quantity, communities had time to evaluate its relevance. This measured absorption reduced sudden disruption and allowed adaptation to occur in manageable steps. Within households, the distribution of labor continued to reflect both capability and necessity. Tasks were assigned according to strength, experience, and available time rather than rigid instruction. When circumstances changed through illness, aging, or seasonal demand, roles adjusted fluidly. This flexibility ensured that essential work was completed even when individual capacity varied, reinforcing resilience at the smallest scale. Material surroundings remained modest, yet they were shaped by accumulated intention. Storage chests were positioned where air could circulate, reducing moisture. Work surfaces were placed near available light. Entryways were oriented to limit drafts. These decisions, repeated across many homes, created interiors that functioned efficiently despite limited space. Comfort was not defined by abundance, but by the reduction of avoidable difficulty. Communal identity was strengthened through shared memory of effort. People remembered who had helped during a difficult harvest, who maintained the mill during winter, or who provided animals when others lacked them. These recollections formed a social ledger more influential than written accounts in daily interaction. Trust grew from demonstrated reliability, and this trust, once established, became a resource as valuable as stored grain. Religious observance continued to provide a framework for interpreting uncertainty without demanding immediate explanation. Rituals offered continuity during periods when outcomes could not be predicted. By returning regularly to familiar words, gestures, and spaces, communities reaffirmed a sense that life possessed order even when events seemed unpredictable. This emotional steadiness supported practical decision-making by reducing panic. As external systems, administrative, commercial, and legal, expanded their reach, villages incorporated new requirements into existing rhythms. Payments were scheduled alongside harvest cycles, notices read in familiar gathering places, and obligations discussed within established assemblies. Rather than replacing local structure, these additions settled into it, demonstrating the capacity of routine to absorb change without losing coherence. For younger generations, growing into this environment meant learning that stability was not accidental but maintained. They observed that each season required preparation, that each shared resource demanded care, and that each relationship depended on consistent behavior. Through participation, they inherited not only techniques but a mindset oriented toward preservation and measured adaptation. In this way, the long arc of everyday life shaped by medieval experience illustrates how enduring systems are sustained, not through singular moments of reform, but through countless quiet decisions made with attention to consequence. The steady tending of land, the maintenance of shared structures, and the reinforcement of trust between neighbors created a foundation strong enough to support gradual transformation. Even as centuries advanced and new influences became more visible, the underlying cadence, guided by season, cooperation, and practical awareness, remained intact. The legacy of these routines persisted not as a relic of the past, but as a living pattern embedded in behavior, reminding later generations that resilience is most often built through patience, continuity, and the careful stewardship of what is already known to endure. Over long stretches of time, the persistence of these habits reveals how communities learn to live within limits rather than in defiance of them. The boundaries set by soil quality, daylight, weather, and available labor were rarely seen as obstacles to overcome, but as conditions to be understood. By aligning effort with these realities, villagers reduced unnecessary strain and preserved strength for moments when greater exertion was unavoidable. This practical acceptance formed a quiet philosophy, one that valued endurance over ambition. The management of energy across the day reflected this awareness. Heavier tasks were often scheduled for the cooler hours of morning, while lighter or repetitive work filled the latter part of daylight. Such sequencing was not recorded in formal instruction, yet it was widely practiced because it conserved physical resources. Over years, individuals learned to sense when effort would be most effective, adjusting pace rather than forcing constant intensity. Food consumption followed similar logic. Meals were timed to sustain labor rather than to provide indulgence. Simple, steady nourishment, bread, pottage, small portions of preserved foods, supported long periods of activity without exhausting limited supplies. Occasional feast days introduced variety, but everyday eating remained measured. This moderation ensured that stores lasted and that strength could be maintained through demanding seasons. Observation of the natural environment continued to guide decision-making. Subtle changes in wind direction, cloud formation, or the behavior of birds were read as indicators of approaching weather. These signs did not guarantee accuracy, yet they improved preparedness. Covering stored grain, reinforcing thatch, or adjusting travel plans based on such cues reduced exposure to sudden disruption. Experience transformed uncertainty into manageable risk. The built environment evolved slowly to support these practices. Pathways were widened where carts frequently passed, stones placed in muddy sections to prevent sinking, and drainage channels extended to protect low-lying plots. None of these alterations were dramatic, yet together they improved reliability. Each small improvement reduced friction in daily movement, saving time and effort that could be redirected toward essential work. Within social life, patience remained a valued trait. Disagreements, when they arose, were often addressed through discussion over time rather than immediate confrontation. In small populations, preserving long-term cooperation was more important than winning short-term disputes. This tendency toward measured resolution helped maintain functional relationships, ensuring that shared responsibilities could continue without lasting division. The role of memory in guiding behavior became increasingly layered. Individuals carried personal recollections of past seasons, while the community preserved older stories that extended beyond any single lifetime. These overlapping memories created depth in decision-making. Choices were informed not only by present conditions but by accumulated experience, allowing responses that balanced caution with necessity. Craftsmanship likewise benefited from this long view. A tool or structure was rarely judged solely by how well it worked when new, but by how it endured through repeated use. Designs that proved resilient were repeated, while those that failed were quietly abandoned. Over generations, this process produced methods refined by survival rather than theory, embedding reliability into everyday objects. Shared rituals continued to reinforce continuity. The marking of seasonal transitions, communal meals after demanding labor, and collective maintenance of important spaces reminded participants that their efforts were interconnected. These gatherings did more than celebrate. They reaffirmed the network of mutual dependence that allowed the village to function. As broader systems of governance and trade continued their gradual expansion, rural communities integrated new expectations without abandoning established priorities. Monetary payments, written notices, or revised obligations were fitted into the existing calendar of work. By aligning external demands with familiar routines, villagers minimized disruption and preserved stability. For younger generations, growing into adulthood within this environment meant inheriting a disciplined approach to change. They observed that new methods were adopted only after they demonstrated clear benefit, and that proven practices were retained even when alternatives existed. This cautious evaluation prevented unnecessary risk while still allowing gradual improvement. Across these patterns, the enduring character of everyday life shaped by medieval experience becomes clear. It was a world sustained not by dramatic progress, but by careful alignment between human effort and environmental reality. Stability emerged from restraint, cooperation, and attention to detail. Even as centuries moved forward and new influences gathered strength, the foundational rhythm, work guided by season, decisions shaped by memory, and community maintained through shared responsibility, remained recognizable. The legacy of this approach persisted quietly, reminding later generations that resilience is often secured not through rapid transformation, but through steady adaptation grounded in practices that have already proven their worth. In considering the long endurance of these rural patterns, it becomes clear that much of their strength came from an ability to balance constancy with quiet adjustment. Traditions were preserved because they worked, yet they were not entirely inflexible. When conditions shifted, through changes in weather patterns, population, or available tools, communities responded by modifying details while keeping the broader structure intact. This approach allowed life to remain recognizable even as circumstances evolved. One example of this balance appeared in the way shared land was managed. While customary boundaries were respected, their practical use could be adapted according to need. A section that proved less productive for grain might be turned toward grazing, or a pathway might be redirected slightly to avoid persistent flooding. These changes were typically modest and discussed collectively, ensuring that adaptation did not disrupt the wider system of cooperation. The steady refinement of daily routines also influenced how time was perceived. Rather than being divided into strict numerical units, the day was experienced as a sequence of purposeful stages. Morning preparation, sustained midday labor, and gradual evening withdrawal into indoor tasks formed a pattern that felt natural rather than imposed. This experiential sense of time reduced anxiety about precision, replacing it with confidence in familiar progression. Household organization continued to reflect practical efficiency. Frequently used tools were stored close to entrances, heavier equipment placed where it could be lifted with minimal strain, and food supplies arranged so that older stores were used before newer ones. Such systems, learned through experience, prevented waste and simplified decision-making during busy periods. Order was not decorative. It was functional. The presence of children within this environment ensured that knowledge remained active rather than static. Young observers asked questions, imitated actions, and gradually participated in more demanding tasks. Their involvement required adults to demonstrate methods clearly, reinforcing shared standards. In this way, teaching and learning occurred continuously, embedded within everyday activity rather than separated into formal instruction. Seasonal uncertainty remained a constant influence, encouraging diversified effort wherever possible. Households that could maintain small gardens alongside field strips or keep a modest variety of animals reduced dependence on any single resource. This diversification was rarely framed as strategy, yet it provided resilience when one source failed. Experience had shown that relying too heavily on a single outcome increased vulnerability. Community spaces, wells, ovens, mills, and gathering areas were maintained with particular care because their failure affected everyone simultaneously. Regular inspection and repair prevented minor damage from escalating into disruption. These shared responsibilities reinforced a sense that certain assets belonged not to individuals, but to the collective welfare of the village. Emotional responses to success and hardship were shaped by long familiarity with fluctuation. A favorable season brought relief and quiet satisfaction, yet it was rarely assumed that such fortune would continue unchanged. Conversely, a difficult year prompted caution rather than despair, supported by the memory of previous recoveries. This tempered outlook helped communities endure variability without losing cohesion. As external influences, administrative reforms, broader markets, and evolving legal practices continued to extend their reach, rural societies demonstrated an ability to incorporate new expectations gradually. Written agreements might confirm obligations already understood through custom, while monetary exchange supplemented rather than replaced traditional forms of payment. By integrating change into existing frameworks, disruption was minimized. Reputation and trust remained central to social stability. Individuals who consistently met shared expectations became informal anchors within the community, relied upon during moments of uncertainty. Their presence provided continuity across generational transitions, ensuring that knowledge and standards did not depend solely on written record. The physical environment, shaped by centuries of attentive use, reflected this continuity. Hedgerows marked long-standing divisions, paths traced efficient routes between essential points, and cultivated soil bore the imprint of repeated care. To those who lived within it, the landscape was not static scenery but a familiar partner in daily effort. Through these intertwined practices, everyday life maintained a rhythm that was both steady and responsive. Change occurred, but it was filtered through collective experience, ensuring that new elements strengthened rather than unsettled established balance. This capacity for measured adaptation allowed communities to navigate shifting conditions without abandoning the habits that had long sustained them. In the broader sweep of history, such persistence illustrates how societies endure not through sudden transformation, but through the patient alignment of tradition with necessity. The routines formed in medieval England, grounded in cooperation, observation, and careful stewardship, continued to echo forward, shaping later patterns of work and community long after the period itself had passed into memory. Over the course of many generations, the steady continuation of these practices created a culture in which reliability was valued more highly than speed. Work was approached with the expectation that it would be repeated again and again, often in similar conditions. This awareness encouraged methods that minimize strain on both people and resources. A task completed carefully, even if it required more time, was preferable to one finished quickly but likely to fail. Durability, rather than immediacy, defined success. This emphasis on lasting results influenced how materials were selected and used. Timber was chosen for strength and seasoned when possible to prevent warping. Stone, though more difficult to shape, was favored in places where permanence was essential. Even simple items, ropes, baskets, wooden pegs, were crafted with attention to how they would endure repeated handling. Over years, these choices reduced the need for constant replacement, conserving effort that could be directed toward essential seasonal work. The rhythm of maintenance became as important as the rhythm of production. After harvest, attention shifted naturally toward repairing tools, reinforcing structures, and preparing storage for the coming months. These quieter periods were not idle. They were investments in the next cycle. By addressing small weaknesses early, communities prevented larger failures during times when labor would be stretched thin. Shared observation played a crucial role in preserving standards. When one household improved a technique, such as arranging thatch more tightly or positioning drainage to divert runoff, others noticed and adapted the method. Innovation spread through visibility rather than formal instruction. Because these adjustments were practical and tested in real conditions, they were accepted without resistance, becoming part of common practice. The experience of time across a lifetime reinforced patience. Individuals saw that fields required years of consistent care to improve, that young animals matured gradually, and that skills strengthened through repetition rather than sudden insight. This long view discouraged decisions based solely on immediate gain. Instead, effort was often directed toward outcomes that might benefit the household or community several seasons ahead. Social expectations reflected the same perspective. Promises were judged not only by words but by sustained behavior. Someone who fulfilled obligations consistently earned trust that extended into future exchanges. Conversely, repeated neglect reduced willingness to cooperate. In this environment, character was understood as the accumulation of actions over time rather than a single defining moment. Environmental awareness remained central. Subtle variations in soil moisture, the persistence of morning frost in shaded areas, or the direction of prevailing winds influenced how land was used. These observations were rarely recorded formally, yet they guided decisions with quiet precision. Knowledge of place was built layer by layer, each season adding detail to an internal map shared across the community. Domestic life continued to revolve around efficient use of limited space. Cooking, storage, and rest areas were arranged so that movement between them required minimal effort. Items needed daily were kept within easy reach, while rarely used tools were stored securely but out of the way. Such organization reduced fatigue and saved time during demanding periods, illustrating how small adjustments could produce lasting benefit. Communal responsibilities remained visible reminders that individual well-being depended on collective care. Maintaining the well, ensuring pathways remained passable, and safeguarding shared grazing areas required ongoing attention. Participation in these tasks reinforced belonging and demonstrated commitment to the group's stability. Over time, these shared efforts created infrastructure that no single household could have sustained alone. Emotional life was shaped by the reassurance that came from familiar cycles. Even when outcomes varied, whether harvests were strong or modest, the sequence of preparation, effort, and conclusion remained consistent. This predictability helped individuals endure uncertainty without losing confidence in the future. Hope was grounded not in expectation of constant improvement, but in the knowledge that recovery had occurred before. As wider economic and administrative networks continued to develop, rural communities integrated new tools and requirements cautiously. A stronger metal fitting, a clearer written record, or a standardized measure was adopted when it proved reliable. Yet these additions rarely displaced established habits. Instead, they were woven into existing routines, strengthening the overall structure without altering its foundation. Through these enduring patterns, Everyday life demonstrated that resilience is often the product of steady attention rather than dramatic change. The careful selection of materials, the regular practice of maintenance, and the reinforcement of trust through consistent action created a system capable of withstanding fluctuation. In the long view, the legacy of medieval rural practice can be seen not as a static inheritance, but as a disciplined approach to living within known limits. By valuing durability, patience, and cooperation, communities sustain themselves across centuries of uncertainty. The cadence of their routines, measured, attentive, and shared, continued to echo forward, shaping later generations who relied, often without realizing it, on the same quiet principles that had guided their predecessors for so long. In the enduring landscape shaped by these practices, one of the most subtle yet powerful forces was familiarity. Familiarity reduced hesitation. When tasks were repeated across years in nearly the same order, individuals could act with confidence even in changing conditions. The hand knew how firmly to hold a tool, how deeply to set a post, or how long to leave grain near the hearth to finish drying. This quiet certainty saved both time and effort, allowing attention to be directed toward unexpected problems rather than routine decisions. Familiarity also shaped how space was understood. A villager moving through fields at dawn did not navigate by measured distance, but by remembered landmarks. The curve of a hedgerow, the angle of a tree line, the slight rise that stayed dry after rain. These cues formed a mental map more detailed than any drawn chart. Because this knowledge was shared, directions could be given with simple reference to features everyone recognized. The repetition of seasonal sound further reinforced this sense of orientation. The creak of a cartwheel on a well-worn path, the steady rhythm of flails during threshing, or the distant call used to coordinate work across open ground all served as signals that the day was unfolding as expected. When such sounds were absent or altered, the change was immediately noticeable, prompting inquiry and, if needed, corrective action. Within households, familiarity guided the handling of tools and supplies. Items were returned to customary places not out of habit alone, but because consistent placement reduced the risk of delay during urgent moments. A missing knife during food preparation or an unseen harness strap at the start of plowing could cost valuable daylight. Order, therefore, functioned as a safeguard against small disruptions that might otherwise accumulate into larger difficulties. The continuity of shared language and expression also supported cooperation. Phrases used to describe soil conditions, weather patterns, or stages of crop growth carried precise meaning within the community. These terms condensed complex observations into a few familiar words, allowing quick understanding without lengthy explanation. Over generations, such language became part of the cultural fabric, linking practical knowledge with everyday conversation. Experience taught that even minor irregularities deserved attention. A slight change in the taste of stored water, an unusual quiet among animals, or the early yellowing of leaves could signal developing problems. Because people were accustomed to stable patterns, deviation stood out clearly. Early response often prevented loss, reinforcing the value of attentiveness. This environment encouraged humility toward forces that could not be controlled. Weather remained unpredictable despite careful observation, and illness could still appear without warning. Rather than assuming mastery, communities prepared contingencies, extra thatch stored for repairs, spare grain hidden against spoilage, and agreements with neighbors for mutual aid. Acceptance of uncertainty did not lead to passivity. It prompted preparation grounded in realism. The rhythm of communal gatherings continued to anchor emotional balance. Regular meetings, whether for worship, shared labor, or seasonal observance, created moments when individual burdens were set within a wider context. Seeing others engaged in the same efforts reduced the sense of isolation that hardship can produce. Collective presence itself became a source of reassurance. As modest improvements in tools and organization accumulated, their benefits were measured less by novelty than by reliability. A hinge that did not warp in damp weather, a storage lid that sealed more tightly, or a cart axle that required less frequent repair saved countless small increments of time. Over years, these savings translated into greater stability, demonstrating how incremental refinement could have lasting impact. Younger generations absorbed these lessons through participation rather than instruction alone. By repeating tasks alongside experienced hands, they learned to recognize both the ordinary and the unusual. The difference between a normal seasonal delay and a sign of deeper trouble became clear only through exposure across multiple cycles. This experiential learning ensured that knowledge remained practical and adaptable. Even as broader political and economic structures continued their slow evolution, the internal coherence of village life depended on these shared understandings. External changes, new levies, adjusted regulations, expanded trade, were interpreted through the lens of established routine. Communities asked not how to abandon familiar patterns, but how to incorporate new requirements without disturbing essential balance. Through the steady influence of familiarity, everyday life maintained continuity across shifting circumstances. Confidence grew from repetition, awareness from comparison, and resilience from preparation. The medieval inheritance, expressed in these quiet habits, demonstrated that stability is often sustained not by rigid control, but by deep knowledge of place, patient attention to detail, and a shared commitment to preserving the patterns that have repeatedly proven their worth. Over extended periods, the continuity created by these familiar patterns fostered a deep sense of orientation within daily life. Orientation was not only physical, knowing where paths, fields, and resources were, but also procedural, understanding what should happen next in the sequence of the day or season. This procedural awareness reduced hesitation and allowed work to proceed with quiet efficiency. When each step followed naturally from the last, fewer decisions required conscious deliberation, conserving mental as well as physical energy. The repetition of seasonal preparation strengthened this orientation further. Before winter, roofs were checked, fuel gathered, and stores reviewed in nearly the same order each year. Before planting, tools were inspected, animals conditioned for labor, and soil tested by touch. Because these actions occurred predictably, their absence was immediately noticeable. In this way, routine acted as an early warning system, revealing neglect before it could produce serious consequences. Material culture reflected this steady attention. Containers were shaped to stack securely, lids fitted to reduce moisture, and hooks placed where weight could be supported without strain. These practical design choices were rarely attributed to individual creators. Instead, they emerged from accumulated trial with successful forms repeated across households. Over time, the village environment filled with objects whose shapes embodied generations of refinement. The management of shared time remained closely tied to audible signals. Bells, voices, and the recognizable cadence of group labor created a collective schedule that required no written timetable. When the bell sounded, individuals adjusted activity almost instinctively. This shared responsiveness ensured that communal tasks, whether gathering for worship or coordinating harvest, could proceed without confusion, even among those who never used a clock. Trust continued to develop through visible consistency. Neighbors observed not only whether duties were completed, but how reliably they were maintained across changing conditions. Someone who repaired a boundary after heavy rain or offered assistance during a neighbor's illness demonstrated commitment that would be remembered. These memories formed a durable network of expectation, guiding future cooperation. Environmental awareness deepened as subtle patterns were confirmed across decades. Areas prone to pooling water were avoided for storage, certain slopes favored for early planting, and windbreaks preserved where they protected vulnerable crops. None of these choices required formal measurement. They were validated through repeated outcome. The land itself provided feedback, and attentive communities adjusted accordingly. Within the household, generational overlap ensured continuity of skill. Older members, less able to perform heavy labor, contributed through guidance, advising when to begin a task, how to interpret a sign of weather, or which method had proven reliable in past difficulty. Their presence linked present decisions with long experience, preventing the loss of knowledge that might otherwise fade between cycles. Moments of shared rest, though brief, carried importance beyond physical recovery. Sitting together after labor allowed conversation that reinforced common understanding. What had gone well, what required attention tomorrow, which resources were diminishing. These exchanges functioned as informal planning sessions, aligning individual effort with communal need without the formality of official meetings. As modest technological and administrative changes continued to filter into rural life, their acceptance depended largely on whether they enhanced reliability. A stronger metal band for a wheel, a clearer written tally of dues, or a standardized measure for grain was welcomed when it reduced uncertainty. Innovations that complicated routine without clear benefit were often set aside, illustrating a preference for stability over novelty. Emotional steadiness grew from the predictability of these systems. Even when outcomes varied, the process remained familiar. People knew how to respond to shortage, how to redistribute effort after illness, and how to rebuild after damage. This confidence in response reduced fear of disruption. The community had, in effect, practiced recovery many times before it was needed again. Younger generations entering adulthood inherited not only tasks, but timing and judgment. They learned when patience was required and when swift action prevented loss. Such discernment came from observing how experienced individuals balanced caution with necessity. Over time, this shared sense of proportion maintained equilibrium within the village. Through these layered practices, everyday life sustained a coherence that could absorb gradual external change without fracturing. The broader world might introduce new expectations, taxation methods, trade opportunities, or administrative records, but the internal cadence of work, rest, and cooperation remained intact. In this enduring rhythm, the legacy of medieval rural society reveals itself as a disciplined partnership between people, place, and memory. Stability was not enforced through rigid control, but cultivated through attentive repetition, shared responsibility, and respect for patterns proven across generations. Even as centuries advanced, these quiet foundations continued to guide behavior, ensuring that the essential balance between effort, resource, and community endured. Over many decades, the continued reliance on familiar sequences created a form of collective intuition. Communities developed an almost unspoken awareness of how much effort a season could reasonably demand and how far resources could be stretched without risk. This intuition was not based on calculation alone, but on the memory of previous outcomes, years when pushing too far had led to exhaustion, and others when careful restraint preserved strength for the months ahead. Through repeated experience, moderation became a practical strategy rather than a moral instruction. The management of shared expectations played an important role in sustaining this balance. When work was distributed across households, there was a general understanding of what constituted a fair contribution. These expectations were rarely written, yet they were reinforced through observation. If one family consistently carried more than its share, neighbors noticed and adjusted in later exchanges. In this way, equilibrium was maintained through quiet correction rather than formal enforcement. Physical surroundings continued to reflect layers of long-term attention. Paths curved along routes that minimized erosion. Gateways were positioned where livestock could be guided with least effort, and storage areas were elevated just enough to avoid damp ground. Each of these details, modest on its own, contributed to a landscape that functioned smoothly. Efficiency emerged not from grand design but from countless small decisions tested across generations. The experience of weather remained a central influence on mood and planning. Extended periods of rain or unexpected warmth were interpreted through comparison with remembered seasons. Because communities had witnessed variation before, unusual conditions did not immediately produce panic. Instead, they prompted measured adjustments, delaying certain tasks, reinforcing vulnerable structures, or conserving supplies until patterns became clearer. Within households, the rhythm of evening provided a natural moment for review. After the day's labor, tools were inspected, remaining provisions noted, and plans for the following morning discussed. These quiet assessments ensured that small problems were addressed promptly. Over time, the habit of daily review reduced the likelihood that minor oversights would accumulate into serious difficulty. The continuity of craft traditions reinforced confidence in local production. Items such as baskets, simple furniture, and repaired harnesses carried recognizable forms that had proven reliable. When a tool broke, the method for fixing it was often already known, having been demonstrated many times before. This familiarity reduced dependence on distant suppliers and allowed essential work to resume quickly after interruption. Social bonds were strengthened through repeated acts of assistance that required no formal acknowledgement. Helping to gather a neighbor's harvest after illness, sharing seed when stores were low, or lending an animal for plowing were gestures remembered long after the immediate need passed. These memories formed a reserve of goodwill that could be drawn upon in future hardship, functioning as a practical extension of shared security. Religious observances continued to provide a steady framework for marking time beyond the agricultural cycle. Regular services, seasonal fasts, and communal prayers created intervals that encouraged reflection. These moments did not interrupt work so much as give it context, reminding participants that their daily efforts were part of a larger, ordered passage of life. As regional markets and administrative systems slowly expanded, rural communities remained selective in their engagement. Opportunities that complemented existing routines, such as exchanging surplus for durable tools, were embraced. Demands that threatened essential seasonal work were negotiated where possible. This cautious participation allowed villages to benefit from broader networks without sacrificing internal stability. Younger members growing into responsibility learned to read both the land and the community with equal care. They observed which fields required patience, which neighbors could be relied upon in urgent moments, and which practices had consistently produced good results. Through this dual awareness, they inherited not just skills but judgment, an understanding of how to act in ways that preserve balance. Across these quiet processes, everyday life maintained a measured pace that favored sustainability over rapid change. The cumulative effect of small, consistent decisions created resilience that was rarely visible in dramatic form. Instead, it appeared as the simple continuation of function, fields planted on time, stores lasting through winter, and shared spaces remaining in repair. In this long continuity, the legacy of medieval rural practice can be understood as a disciplined partnership between memory, environment, and cooperation. Stability emerged because each generation accepted the responsibility to preserve what worked while adjusting gently where needed. Through patience, attentiveness, and mutual support, communities sustained a way of life capable of enduring uncertainty, carrying forward its steady rhythm into the evolving centuries that followed. With the passage of still more generations, the persistence of these quiet systems revealed how deeply routine could shape perception itself. People did not experience their lives as a sequence of isolated events, but as a continuous flow in which each day connected naturally to the next. This continuity reduced the sense of abrupt change. Even when circumstances shifted, through a difficult season or an unexpected demand, the underlying structure of daily activity remained recognizable, providing reassurance that order had not been lost. The practice of preparing in advance became an almost instinctive response to uncertainty. Spare materials were set aside when available, tools were checked before they were urgently needed, and small reserves of food were protected from casual use. These actions were not driven by fear so much as by habit formed through repeated experience. Over time, preparation came to feel as ordinary as the work it supported. Attention to small efficiencies continued to accumulate practical benefit. A doorway widened slightly to allow easier passage of bundles. A storage hook moved closer to the hearth for quicker access, or a path cleared of stones to prevent cart damage. All represented minor adjustments that saved effort across countless repetitions. The value of such changes was measured not in immediate impact, but in the gradual reduction of friction within daily tasks. Shared understanding of acceptable behavior also contributed to stability. Expectations about when help should be offered, how disputes ought to be addressed, and how communal resources were to be used were reinforced through observation rather than formal decree. Because these standards were visible in everyday action, they required little explanation. Conformity was encouraged by the simple desire to remain in good standing with neighbors whose cooperation was essential. The sensory landscape remained a reliable guide. The warmth of the hearth at dusk, the smell of cut hay in late summer, and the sound of animals settling for the night marked transitions that were felt as much as they were seen. These cues provided orientation even in the absence of written schedules, reminding individuals that the day and year were unfolding according to familiar patterns. Within this environment, decision-making often favored caution. When uncertain, households tended to choose the option that preserved resources rather than risk loss. Planting slightly less seed to ensure some remained in reserve, delaying travel until weather stabilized, or repairing an older tool instead of attempting an untested replacement reflected a preference for reliability. Such choices, repeated widely, reduced collective exposure to sudden hardship. Community memory continued to function as a living archive. Stories of past storms, shortages, or recoveries were retold not as distant history but as practical guidance. These narratives carried lessons about which actions had proven effective and which had led to difficulty. By embedding experience in story, knowledge remained accessible even to those who could not consult written records. As modest improvements in trade and administration filtered into rural life, their influence was most visible in areas where they enhanced predictability. Standardized measures reduced disputes during exchange, clearer records confirmed obligations, and more dependable routes allowed goods to arrive with fewer delays. Each improvement, though limited in scale, strengthened confidence that planning based on past experience would remain valid. Generational continuity ensured that these benefits were preserved. Younger members learned to respect both inherited methods and carefully tested innovations. They observed that change was accepted not because it was new, but because it demonstrated lasting usefulness. This selective adoption prevented disruption while allowing gradual refinement of daily practice. Moments of collective effort, repairing shared structures, preparing for seasonal transitions, or assisting a household in difficulty, continued to reinforce the principle that stability depended on cooperation. Participation in these tasks created visible proof that the community remained functional. Even after periods of strain, the act of working together restored confidence in shared resilience. Through these layered habits, everyday life maintained a calm, deliberate pace that prioritized endurance. Progress, when it occurred, was measured in reduced risk, improved reliability, and smoother coordination rather than dramatic transformation. The environment, shaped by centuries of attentive use, supported this approach by providing consistent feedback that guided future action. In this enduring rhythm, the legacy of medieval rural society appears not as a static inheritance, but as a method of living grounded in patience and observation. By aligning effort with known limits and preserving practices proven across time, communities sustain themselves through uncertainty. The steady cadence of preparation, cooperation, and measured adjustment continued to carry forward, quietly influencing how later generations understood stability, responsibility, and the careful stewardship of the world around them. With the passage of still more generations, the persistence of these quiet systems revealed how deeply routine could shape perception itself. People did not experience their lives as a sequence of isolated events, but as a continuous flow in which each day connected naturally to the next. This continuity reduced the sense of abrupt change. Even when circumstances shifted, through a difficult season or an unexpected demand, the underlying structure of daily activity remained recognizable, providing reassurance that order had not been lost. The practice of preparing in advance became an almost instinctive response to uncertainty. Spare materials were set aside when available, tools were checked before they were urgently needed, and small reserves of food were protected from casual use. These actions were not driven by fear so much as by habit formed through repeated experience. Over time, preparation came to feel as ordinary as the work it supported. Attention to small efficiencies continued to accumulate practical benefit. A doorway widened slightly to allow easier passage of bundles. A storage hook moved closer to the hearth for quicker access, or a path cleared of stones to prevent cart damage. All represented minor adjustments that saved effort across countless repetitions. The value of such changes was measured not in immediate impact, but in the gradual reduction of friction within daily tasks. Shared understanding of acceptable behavior also contributed to stability. Expectations about when help should be offered, how disputes ought to be addressed, and how communal resources were to be used were reinforced through observation rather than formal decree. Because these standards were visible in everyday action, they required little explanation. Conformity was encouraged by the simple desire to remain in good standing with neighbors whose cooperation was essential. The sensory landscape remained a reliable guide. The warmth of the hearth at dusk, the smell of cut hay in late summer, and the sound of animals settling for the night marked transitions that were felt as much as they were seen. These cues provided orientation even in the absence of written schedules, reminding individuals that the day and year were unfolding according to familiar patterns. Within this environment, decision-making often favored caution. When uncertain, households tended to choose the option that preserved resources rather than risk loss, planting slightly less seed to ensure some remained in reserve, delaying travel until weather stabilized, or repairing an older tool instead of attempting an untested replacement reflected a preference for reliability. Such choices, repeated widely, reduced collective exposure to sudden hardship. Community memory continued to function as a living archive. Stories of past storms, shortages, or recoveries were retold not as distant history but as practical guidance. These narratives carried lessons about which actions had proven effective and which had led to difficulty. By embedding experience in story, knowledge remained accessible even to those who could not consult written records. As modest improvements in trade and administration filtered into rural life, their influence was most visible in areas where they enhanced predictability. Standardized measures reduced disputes during exchange, clearer records confirmed obligations, and more dependable routes allowed goods to arrive with fewer delays. Each improvement, though limited in scale, strengthened confidence that planning based on past experience would remain valid. Generational continuity ensured that these benefits were preserved. Younger members learned to respect both inherited methods and carefully tested innovations. They observed that change was accepted not because it was new, but because it demonstrated lasting usefulness. This selective adoption prevented disruption while allowing gradual refinement of daily practice. Moments of collective effort, repairing shared structures, preparing for seasonal transitions, or assisting a household in difficulty, continued to reinforce the principle that stability depended on cooperation. Participation in these tasks created visible proof that the community remained functional. Even after periods of strain, the act of working together restored confidence in shared resilience. Through these layered habits, everyday life maintained a calm, deliberate pace that prioritized endurance. Progress, when it occurred, was measured in reduced risk, improved reliability, and smoother coordination rather than dramatic transformation. The environment, shaped by centuries of attentive use, supported this approach by providing consistent feedback that guided future action. In this enduring rhythm, the legacy of medieval rural society appears not as a static inheritance, but as a method of living grounded in patience and observation. By aligning effort with known limits and preserving practices proven across time, communities sustain themselves through uncertainty. The steady cadence of preparation, cooperation, and measured adjustment continued to carry forward, quietly influencing how later generations understood stability, responsibility, and the careful stewardship of the world around them. Over the long arc of continuity, another defining feature of this way of life was the gradual deepening of collective patience. Patience was not merely a personal virtue. It was a shared expectation shaped by the realities of land and season. Crops could not be hurried beyond their natural pace. Animals matured according to their own rhythms, and materials such as timber required time to season before they could be trusted in construction. Because outcomes depended on processes that unfolded slowly, communities learned to measure progress across months and years rather than days. This extended time frame influenced how effort was distributed. Rather than exhausting resources in a single push, work was paced so that strength remained available when most needed. During demanding periods such as harvest, intensity increased, but it was balanced by quieter intervals devoted to repair and preparation. The alternation between exertion and consolidation preserved both physical capability and morale, ensuring that the cycle could continue without collapse. Observation remained the primary tool for judging when patience should give way to action. The color of ripening grain, the firmness of soil after rainfall, or the behavior of livestock signaled when a task had reached its proper moment. Acting too early risked waste. Acting too late invited loss. Experience taught individuals to recognize these narrow windows, aligning effort precisely with opportunity. Within households, this sense of timing shaped everyday organization. Tasks were arranged so that one activity naturally prepared the conditions for the next. Fuel gathered earlier in the year supported winter cooking. Repaired tools awaited spring planting. Preserved foods carried families through lean months. Each completed step reduced future uncertainty, creating a chain of preparation that extended across seasons. Community cooperation reinforced patience by distributing responsibility. When multiple households contributed to a shared project, such as maintaining drainage channels or reinforcing a common structure, the workload became manageable without haste. Progress might appear slow, yet it was steady and reliable. The visible accumulation of small contributions built confidence that collective effort would reach completion. Emotional responses were tempered by this long view. Success was appreciated but rarely assumed to be permanent. Likewise, difficulty was endured with the understanding that conditions would change. This moderated outlook reduced extremes of optimism or despair, replacing them with a stable expectation that circumstances moved in cycles. Such emotional balance supported clear judgment during uncertain periods. Material culture reflected the same respect for time. Objects were maintained rather than discarded, repaired rather than replaced, and adapted rather than abandoned. A tool might pass through several hands over decades, each owner adding small adjustments that improved function. These layers of modification turned ordinary items into repositories of shared experience. The environment itself responded to this patient stewardship. Fields managed with rotation recovered fertility, hedgerows carefully trimmed remained effective boundaries, and pathways kept clear resisted erosion. These outcomes were not immediate, yet they accumulated into a landscape that rewarded consistent care. The visible results reinforced the belief that steady attention produced lasting benefit. As broader economic and administrative systems continued their gradual expansion, rural communities integrated new expectations without sacrificing this measured pace. Written records were consulted alongside memory, coin used alongside barter, and improved tools adopted when they demonstrated reliability. By filtering change through the lens of patience, villages avoided disruptions that rapid alteration might have caused. Younger generations absorbed this orientation through daily participation. They learned that rushing often created more work later, while careful preparation reduced future strain. Observing elders who had navigated many cycles of hardship and recovery, they came to trust methods proven over time. Patience became not a constraint, but a practical advantage. Moments of communal gathering, whether for seasonal observance, shared meals, or cooperative labor, provided opportunities to reflect on progress made across the year. These occasions reinforced the understanding that achievements were cumulative, built from many small, coordinated efforts. Recognition of this collective patience strengthened commitment to maintaining it. Through these enduring patterns, everyday life sustained a rhythm that favored continuity over sudden change. The slow maturation of crops, skills, and relationships created stability that could withstand external pressures. Even as the wider world evolved, the internal cadence of work and rest, preparation and completion, remained steady. In this long perspective, the legacy of medieval rural practice can be seen as a disciplined trust in time itself. By allowing processes to unfold at their natural pace and aligning effort accordingly, communities preserved resources, strengthened cooperation, and ensured survival across uncertain conditions. The quiet power of patience, expressed through routine, observation, and shared responsibility, continued to guide behavior, leaving an enduring imprint on how later generations understood resilience, and the careful stewardship of everyday life.